So the second half of July is the biggest astrological turning point, one of the biggest ones of the year, right? I feel like I've been talking about the leading up to this point for a few months. We have several major planetary shifts happening pretty much back to back, and together they're creating change, both personally and collectively. I think we're all feeling it. This isn't one of those little, quick jammies, like a Mercury retrograde, which Mercury's been retrograde, but it's not really that. It's not that quick passing transit. We're really being asked to look at our lives and where we've outgrown things. So, outgrown the relationships or the structures or the old belief systems or just ourselves, right? Where we realize we have been keeping ourselves too small or where we've been looking at ourselves through the wrong lens, whatever it is, right? What have we outgrown? So, let's unpack it in a very general way during this introduction, and then I'll break it out into each of the rising signs. For those of you who are new here, my name is Jackie. I'm a Western evolutionary astrologer. So just keep that in mind. I practice whole house, just depending on what other modality you might have dabbled with in the past. We do whole house here. If you'd like to work with me privately, I am running some deep specials for the next month. So you can check out the details in the description box below. But without any further ado, let's get into unpacking. Starting from like the 19th, I want to say, to the 22nd, we have this basket configuration, okay? And a basket just means in astrology that the planets are very weighted on like one side over the other, right? Having to do with the chart. So the energy is really starting to build though, as Jupiter in Leo joins Hygeia, opposes Pluto retrograde and Juno retrograde, both in Aquarius. And at the same time, Jupiter is making this beautiful trine to Neptune retrograde in Aries, while Pluto and Juno are also working harmoniously with Neptune. So I promise, if you don't know what the hell I just said, just hang out. I'm just going to interpret, right? Let's talk about what these combos mean, okay? This brings together some really big themes having to do specifically with personal growth. And that's such a term we throw around, but really reevaluating and reassessing where we're at in our life and how it is that we view ourselves and other people through that version of ourselves that we're now living. It also has us looking at healing and power relationships and our thoughts and visions for the future, because Jupiter and Leo wants us to expand, right? This energy takes up space because it's Jupiter. He's very expansive, right? And Jupiter wants us to have a lot of confidence in who we are. Okay, that's who Jupiter is. Now, Hygeia, she's the asteroid of health, but it's not only physical health, it's also mental health. But she reminds us that real growth involves very often a lot of healing, whether we want to or not, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, whatever it is, but it's not only physical, okay? Now, across the sky, we have Pluto and Juno asking us to take a real hard look at ourselves, honestly, where power has become unbalanced in our life, whether it's in relationships, whatever organization you're involved with, or just even within yourself. And Neptune adds this intuition and this inspiration, helping us to imagine a different path instead of just staying stuck in those old patterns. Because what Neptune also does, remember, Neptune rules Pisces in that 12th house energy, which is the energy of the victim as well. And self-sabotaging behavior and not understanding proper boundaries, but also us being a victim. And this is not a woe is me, A, B, and C happened to me. It's not like that. But I want you to understand that, Neptune also wants us to realize, where are we victimizing ourselves? Where are we playing victim? But also, where are we staying in things that aren't honoring who we really are? And he wants us to imagine something larger than that. Now, moving on to July 23rd. Mercury does station direct. And after this few weeks of delays and second guessing and revisiting the past, I know I really dislike Mercury retrograde, right? It's just, he is what it is, right? It is what it is. Mercury is retrograde more than half the year. But as a Gemini sun, and my sun is seated in my sixth house, which is where Virgo lives. Mercury also rules Virgo. So that whenever Mercury goes retrograde, I almost wish I had Mercury retrograde in my birth chart, but whenever Mercury goes retrograde, It's very snafu-y for me, but he's finally stationing direct in Cancer. And this isn't your typical Mercury going direct. It's sitting with Kronos and Hades while squaring Saturn and Aries. So the conversations are happening, in a way where they're very weighted. They're very weighted. They're consequential, I guess, is really what I should say. So when we have energies like this, truths tend to come to the surface. You might finally understand something that you've been processing emotionally, having that important conversation or making that decision that you've been putting off, and themes around, because it's in Cancer, around family, around home, security, leadership, responsibility, and unresolved issues can all come into focus at this point. And Saturn is reminding us that clarity typically comes with accountability. So sometimes we have to face what's uncomfortable before we can move forward. Now, moving more towards the end of the month, July 26th into the 27th, Saturn stations retrograde and the nodes change signs. So we've been talking about this for a while. The nodes are changing signs for the first time in 18 months. This is beginning a new 18-month cycle. Saturn is stationing retrograde in Aries, asking us to slow down and reassess how we're doing our energy. And are we standing up for ourselves in healthy ways and acting from a healthy space, right? Of confidence and feeling good about ourselves? Or are we coming from a place of fear? Because Saturn retrograde gives us that chance to strengthen our foundation before taking whatever that next step is. Now, almost immediately after that, again, the lunar nodes change. So it's happening overnight. Saturn goes retrograde first, and then like not even half a day later, the nodes change. And they move into Aquarius, north node into Aquarius, south node into Leo, which is again starting that 18-month cycle, hanging out in there with Jupiter. So it should be an interesting ride, especially over this next year. But this shift encourages us to move away from this idea of needing outside validation or defining ourselves by these old identities, but instead we're being called to move towards this more authentic space, right? Who are we really, right? And hanging with communities and people and networks and friends even who are stronger than where we've been, more in alignment with who we are, and really considering a future, because Aquarius is very connected to the future, that's based more on purpose than appearances. It's less about thinking about how do people see you and more about who are you becoming, right? That's what this is going to, and obviously the part of life that this focuses on is going to depend on what house you have it in. So just make sure that you are checking first for your rising sign, especially then your sun and or moon, okay? And then the end of the month, July 29th, Aquarius full moon, powerful moon in Aquarius that aligns with Pluto and with Juno retrograde, directly opposing the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia and Leo. So it's not a regular full moon, but full moons always do bring something to light, right? It's like, picture the sun just like really shining down on something to illuminate and light up. But this one feels especially revealing. And it's for a lot of us, it's going to be really pulling the blanket off certain relationships dynamics, like power struggles or emotional patterns that are just not working, or situations that have been just quietly building underneath the surface that maybe we've been dancing around a little bit, right? Dancing around that 5,000-pound elephant in the room. Now, at the same time, the end of that month, on that same day, Jupiter is Cazimi, giving us an incredible opportunity for insight and confidence and growth. While something may be coming to an end, something much more authentic is beginning. And when I say Cazimi, it just means Jupiter is hanging out in there with a lot of friends. And so we have this heat, this build up that motivates change. Now, overall, the second half of July is asking us to just like stop and assess, right? And figure out what's no longer vibing with us. It's really about finding the courage to grow into who we're becoming and letting go of those outdated roles and creating relationships and new aspirations for the future and communities that truly reflect who we are now, friends who we are now, right? Really looking at our tribe. All right, the astrology can feel pretty intense during this energy. I'm not going to lie, right? But it is opening a door to something much more meaningful and lasting. That's it, there's change here, but it's really the kind of energy where it's lasting change. Okay, so that is the introduction. With that, I'm going to get into each of the rising signs, and we're going to get started with our Aries friends. Hey, Aries Rising. So I hope you guys are doing great. Looking at your astrology, if I had to sum everything happening with the second half of July, it's really looking at who you are right now and where you're going, right? This idea of like who you're becoming, because you're recognizing that there is a shift for you. And that's kind of at the core of where you guys are at right now. And the biggest idea that you guys should be exploring this month is this powerful opposition between Jupiter and Hygeia in your fifth house and Pluto and Juno retrograde in your 11th house. This isn't simply about balancing that fifth house of fun, joy, children, entrepreneurial efforts, romance, old friendships. This is 11th house is new friendships. It's your future. 11th house, your networks, your goals and gains, where it is that you're going. It's not just about balancing that, because when I say in opposition, it's always about balancing, but it is much deeper than that. It's about this ongoing tension between your authentic self and who you really are and the roles that you've accepted within all of your relationships, whether it's husband, wife, son, friend, whatever kind of worker, your communities, and even your long-term dreams, right? What role have you accepted up to this point? Because Jupiter's coming in and wants to expand. And remember, we also have the nodes that are going to be working in there. So in your fifth house, it's asking you to reconnect with your heart and what it is that you really want and your joy and what makes you happy and excited and inspired and creative and what makes you just kind of lose yourself and stuff, right? Well, part of it, think about the fifth house, first of all. It's the house that we co-create with God, but it's very connected to our the child within, very connected to um our childhood. So really thinking about what part of yourself that you've been maybe neglecting because life's just become a lot more about responsibility than for fulfillment and going after and doing what it is that you really want. Because for a lot of you, life has become an endless train of obligations where you end up taking care of everyone else and you show up and you handle the crisis or whatever it is, right? You do the thing. You keep pushing because that's what Aries does. The Aries just does the thing and pushes forward. But somewhere along the way, it is possible and likely that you've confused surviving with living. And so Jupiter is coming in as in his happy little expansive self and just is posing a super and perhaps for some of you uncomfortable question. Like seriously, when was the last time you felt truly happy, like down to your soul happy? And not because everything was in place and perfect, but just because you were you. You were totally just being you. You're just your own self. Okay? You're almost not going to be able to escape this question. Even if it's not very overt, it's going to be like lingering right underneath your surface here. So Hygeia's presence reminds you that it isn't just about happiness, it's about healing. And sometimes we think healing only happens through hard conversations or therapy or just working through old stuff. But healing also happens when we just have more fun and we laugh more and we create something beautiful and we fall in love again with that person or with our children or with our business or with that hobby, whatever it is. So spend time with someone you love, with children, your grandchildren, rediscover an old passion, or just give yourself permission to enjoy your life that you've worked so hard to build. Joy is very much medicine during this time, specifically for you. But then we have to think about Pluto. Pluto and Juno retrograde in your 11th house across your wheel. They aren't going to let you avoid a much bigger elephant in the room kind of conversation. And that conversation is going to be connected to your realization of what you've been giving away in order to belong to something, in order to keep the peace in something, in order to go along to get along kind of thing. Now, not everyone gives away their voices in obvious ways, by the way, because a lot of Aries energy, you guys are the emperor and It's a leadership energy. It's like, I don't give my voice away. Sometimes we don't do it in less obvious ways. Sometimes it happens so gradually that we don't even recognize it's happening, where we become the one that everyone depends on. We become the peacemaker, the responsible one, but the person that everybody counts on. We stay loyal to friendships because of the history. We remain committed to whatever group because we've invested years into them, or we keep chasing that dream that just no longer feels like our own, but just simply because we've already come so far. We've been going after this thing for so long. Pluto has this amazing way of exposing where we've been functioning on autopilot. And he's sitting there in that 11th house of your future. So a lot of you are going to start to realize, some of you a little more profoundly than others, depending on what's going on in your own personal chart, that some of your goals no longer fit who you're becoming, where certain friendships can feel heavier than they once did. You might even recognize that you've been trying to earn acceptance from people whose approval no longer even matters to you anymore. And not that they don't matter, just their acceptance doesn't matter the way that it once did. And because Juno is traveling in there with Pluto, it's not only about friendships. Juno represents our commitments, our contracts, promises that we've made, but to other people, to other people and ourselves. So it's not only about others, it's about accountability to ourselves. And while Juno is retrograde, you're really reviewing these things very internally. Is this friendship equal? Is there equal give and take? Is there a mutuality about it? Is it healthy? Are people in your life still allowing you to grow? Or have there become relationships active in your life where maybe one of you continues to evolve, where the other one is trying to preserve that older version of who you used to be? One of the hardest realities of growth is recognizing that not everyone is meant to understand the person that you are becoming. And it doesn't mean that you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't mean you're like, that's it. I'm out of here. I'm not friends with you after all of these years or whatever. It's not that. But it's about having that conversation, because something is meant to either deepen or transform. So, and that transformation could be not being friends anymore. Yes, that is possible for some, but what's not going to happen is the status quo. Sometimes healthier boundaries established, is having that one conversation can mean everything for that connection and that relationship. But sometimes growth requires enough honesty to admit that you've been trying to fit into a situation that you just don't simply belong in, right? Now, Neptune's beautiful trine to Jupiter offers this tremendous amount of support through all of this that we're talking about. As Neptune is moving through your first house, it's gently dissolving identities that you've outgrown. Right? That's what he does. He dissolves things. And so the version of yourself that constantly needed to prove something, needed to seek approval, just carry everybody else's stuff, everyone else's expectations, everyone else's problems, whatever it is, it's just all going to start to fade. When I say fade, it's almost going to be, I'm looking at this, the realization has an element of grace about it, if that makes sense. It's going to happen a little incrementally, right? And in its place, this quieter confidence is going to emerge, right? One that's rooted far more in achievement, more in being real, authentic with yourself, honest with yourself. And then Mercury stations direct in your fourth house, and this brings movement around home and family and all those fourth house things, emotional security, conversations, because it's Mercury that maybe you've been putting off. If you've been wrestling with some sort of important decision, especially one involving either family dynamic rather, home property, real estate, or just feeling emotionally secure, the mental fog around that is going to start to lift. So it doesn't mean that it's going to happen overnight as soon as Mercury stations direct, but you're going to likely notice yourself trusting your own inner voice a lot more than those outside opinions that maybe you've been giving a little more credence to than they deserve. Now, as Saturn stations retrograde in your first house, you're invited into an even deeper review of your identity. Now, I want to just say this, getting it out of the way. Saturn retrograde in the first house can make a person feel small. It can make meanwhile, you're just dealing with finally getting rid of Chiron, right? But Saturn retrograde in the first house, when I say small, not small, but like almost like first of all, it increases guilt. Guilt can be increased when Saturn goes retrograde, especially in that first house. Any of the angular houses, 1, 4, 7, and 10, we could feel very guilty and we could feel a little more hesitant to express ourselves. So I just want to get that, out. And I also want to clarify, Saturn is not asking you to become someone different. He's asking you to become someone more honest. And there's a difference there. Where have you been living according to expectations that are just no longer jiving with you? Where have you been confusing strength with carrying everything by yourself? I'm going to go it alone. I'll take care of it. Real maturity isn't about proving how much you can handle. It's not. It's about recognizing what no longer it's what's no longer necessary for you to carry. Whether it's your own stuff, whether it's other people's stuff, you don't have to carry everything. Okay? Then, right after that, we experience one of the biggest energetic shifts of the year is that North Node moves into Aquarius, that North Node, and then the South Node into Leo. So, over the next 18 months, your soul's growth is going to be coming through building authentic community rather than trying to do everything alone. And ironically, though, before you could find your people, you first have to release the need to be everything to everyone. You really have to let go of, and this is not an obnoxious, I don't care what other people think of me. It's not about that. And of course, we care what people think of us to a degree, to a healthy degree, that's perfectly normal. Okay. It's disingenuous to say that 100% all the time. But it's about recognizing healthy boundaries, what your needs are, what their needs are, being respectful of one another. So it's not about, I don't need anybody. It's about, what, I could really either use someone's help or I would just really appreciate that person doing this thing with me without feeling like you owe them or without feeling like you have to take over the game, the whole game, right? And then right after that, we have the full moon in Aquarius, which is going to be happening again in that 11th house, hanging out in there with that node. So this is where everything starts to come together. And it really does activate Pluto and Juno, both retrograde, while directly opposing the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in Leo. So emotionally, for you guys, this can feel like standing between two versions of yourself. One is familiar and the other one is not. But the other one is what's calling you forward. And that's always the North Node. You're being asked to step out of your wheelhouse, step out of your comfort zone. Destiny is calling. Will you answer? Because we have free will. So you want to hang out on the couch and eat a box of Oreo cookies and watch Netflix. You could always sit it out. But you have to understand that over the next year and a half, it's 18 months, that North Node in Aquarius is really going to be asking you to go in a different direction. Okay. Just this whole nodal axis. I actually love these two together. I think it's very beautiful for our future. And you're probably going to experience this turning point involving a friendship or some sort of group or partnership for a lot of you. For some of you, none of those. And it's just going to be this more, this, if say dream, it sounds very dramatic, but like your future plans, right? Rethinking what it is that you want your future to look like. Something hidden becomes very obvious. And it's not that you were keeping it hidden on purpose. Maybe it was hidden because of someone else not fully disclosing something, or maybe it was just your conscious mind protecting you. Whatever it is, a truth that you've sensed for months finally becomes impossible to ignore. So it's not necessarily about some sort of dramatic ending. It's about this undeniable clarity, and then something beautiful happens because then Jupiter becomes Cazimi and it's sitting right in the heart and pocket of the sun. And I love this symbolism because after spending a lot of the month asking the difficult questions about power and loyalty and identity and belonging, Jupiter reminds you that wisdom is waiting on the other side of all of those questions. So this is a time where your heart and your higher self finally begin speaking the same language. Those two versions of yourself that I mentioned a moment ago are finally going to kind of be meeting up and sitting down and having a real open heart to heart. So you may suddenly realize that the life that you've been trying to build isn't supposed to impress anyone else. it's really meant to reflect who you truly are. So it's not about this keeping up with the Joneses, right? That's the gift of Jupiter's Cazimi at the end of this month. It's not being more successful, having more money or recognition or whatever, but it's more about this idea of alignment. And that's another word we throw around a lot, which I kind of don't even like it, but it's alignment is like where you're meant to be and not where you feel like you're trying to fit yourself in. Now, guys, what can come to your consciousness during this time is that what you've been feeling like isn't fitting may actually be something that you do fit with, but you've been fighting it on your end because of things that you've been going through. Right? So don't be surprised if those feelings come up, right? And just being this super honest version of yourself is what your future foundation is going to be built on. So I hope all of this information gave you a few things to think about over the rest of the month of July. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye bye. Hey Taurus, how you guys doing? Taurus rising to a lesser degree, sun and moon. For you guys, the second half of the month, it's just reaching far beyond your career, your home life. This, at its core, it's really about your security. So if I had to say one word, it's really more about your security. Looking at what you've built, looking at what you've accomplished, looking at the roles that you've played for and around everyone else and everything else in your life, right? How well do these ideas resonate with you? You know, um, really looking within, regardless of what's happening around you, are you feeling good about what's within yourself? And that's an inescapable thing for you guys right now. It's a big time for you. Chiron is in your energy right now. Your second house, eighth house axis is being lit up. But let's consider this conversation that's going on and unfolding as we move forward between Jupiter and Hygeia. They're moving through your fourth house. Fourth house is an angular house. It's having to do with home, property, real estate, your emotional security, your family. It's the deepest house of your chart. And it's directly opposing Pluto and Juno retrograde in your 10th house. Again, these are angular houses, which really require some sort of action. Okay. Now, this is one of those transits that can completely reshape your understanding for many of you of success. And not because everything changes overnight, but because your priorities start to change. We're going to start looking at things differently as a collective. And for you, this is the part of life that's really going to have a bit of a floodlight focused on it. Now, Jupiter in your fourth house wants to expand your inner world, right? It's a moon ruled house. It's very connected to your emotions. So, yeah, I mean, it could certainly coincide with fourth house things such as moves, right? Because Jupiter expands in that fourth house. You could expand your home, you could move your home. More people could come and live in your home. There could be some sort of this desire for expansion. Again, buying or selling property, change, some sort of change within family as well. It does depend on what you have in your natal birth chart in the fourth house that Jupiter's working with, because whatever is in those like first 10 degrees, Jupiter is going to be amplifying it. So if you have Pluto in there or Saturn in there, it's going to be much different than if, for example, you're having your Jupiter return or if it's Venus, right? So it's going to be expanding whatever it works with. So it's just something to keep in mind, right? These are general readings just for the archetype of Taurus rising. But psychologically, your mindset could be expanding as too, it's a deep energy. It's asking you to create this life that actually feels like home for you. And that's a very important distinction, right? It's no longer about this is where I live versus this is what feels like home, right? There's a difference there. And a lot of you have spent years creating stability for everyone around you. You're dependable, you're loyal, people know that they can count on you. It's somewhere along the way, you may have become so focused on creating this external security that you've neglected your own emotional well-being. And I do see this a lot, especially with Taurus risings and Taurus suns. I do see this a lot where a lot of that with that strong Taurus energy, you're so focused on creating the security for yourself, where it's like, do I have the money in the bank? Do I have the house? Do I have the food? Whatever it is that I need to be okay, where you almost feel like you're not allowed to really consider your emotional well-being, you know? And so Jupiter really wants to shift that, because you could build this beautiful life on paper and still feel very restless when you walk through your own front door. And Jupiter is starting to show you how to slow down enough to notice that. It may not happen straight out of the gate, guys. He's going to be in there for a year, right? He's just in there very recently. Now, Hygeia adds another level by reminding you that your nervous system needs a home just as much as your body does. So, really looking at whatever stress you're on, whatever stress you've been under, whatever anxiety you've been under. Because healing isn't only about taking care of your physical health. And we all know that, right? We all know that. But Hygeia is really pushing you to really look at your emotional environment, because it's very connected to the moon here, where you don't constantly feel like you're bracing yourself for that next thing, that next shoe to drop, the next responsibility, solving the next problem, or carrying everyone else's stuff before carrying your own. You know what I mean? And then there's Pluto, who's kind of tinkering with the situation as well. And he's not alone. He's with Juno, and they're both retrograde, and they're transforming your 10th house of career, reputation, leadership, energy, public identity, you're standing in the world. Also, your very long-term plans, right? Some of you may not be working, but it's the ultimate status of your marriage. It's the ultimate status of the path that you're on right now. So this isn't simply about changing jobs or getting promoted. It's about examining the relationship that you've developed with the idea and actually the word of achievement itself, right? And again, even if you're not working anymore, this idea of what does it mean to have this achieved type of life? Some of you have spent years tying yourself to productivity and what it is that's tangible. You're a very tangible energy, right? And Jupiter is kind of pulling you in this other direction. Others of you maybe have built your identities about being just the reliable, fill in the blank employee, or the successful business owner, or the caretaker, or the professional, the parent, or the person that everyone depends on. And those identities probably served you for a really long time. But now Pluto retrograde with Juno, very connected to your commitments and what you're willing to commit to, is really asking you to look at who are you when all of those things are taken away, when all the titles and all the stuff that you've been representing for other people are taken away. Who are you underneath all of that? Because if you experience like a career change, or um, there's going to be this evolution of your definition of success as well. Who are you under all of that? Who are you if the approval that you've spent years working towards suddenly doesn't matter as much anymore, right? All of these things that you've been trying to hold up and together, they just don't matter in the same way anymore. And it's not an easy question for you guys, because you're naturally a very stable or desiring stability energy. But Pluto reminds us that sometimes the greatest instability comes from clinging to identities that we've already outgrown. That creates a lot of instability. And Juno's retrograde with Pluto here, Pluto retrograde, adds another very important layer, because a lot of you are reevaluating your commitments connected to work and leadership, or just your long-term goals and responsibilities. Maybe you've been really loyal to an employer who just no longer values your contributions in the way that either they once did, or they never really did in a way that you feel is respectful. Or maybe you've continued saying yes to things because it's simply your role and it's who you are. Or maybe you're realizing that success is built totally around sacrifice, and that the cost of that is just too high for you at this point. This doesn't mean, again, that you're throwing everything away, right? It doesn't mean that you're walking away from whatever you've created, whatever you've built. It doesn't mean that. It's just like asking you to think about, is what you've built up to this point, regardless of how small or how large is it supporting the life that you actually want to live? Does it make sense for you anymore? Now, Neptune's supportive trine from the 12th house is quietly working behind the scenes, right? Because that's what happens in the 12th house. It's the house of behind the curtain, right? Throughout all of this. So your intuition is very strong right now, even if it doesn't always make sense to you. I really want you to trust your intuition right now because you could find yourself needing to pay attention to this little voice. You could feel a little more tired. You could be desiring more solitude, or just more time to reflect before making these big decisions. So pay attention to 12th house things. Pay attention to your dreams, your instincts, and those quiet moments when clarity just hits upon you unexpectedly. Not every answer comes through analysis here. Sometimes answers come through just, sitting still, or even if you're not physically sitting still, where you're in this space of allowing yourself to be meditative or isolated, even if you're just cleaning the house or doing whatever, you're in your head. This is a good time to be in your head. Okay. Now, when Mercury stations direct in your third house, Mercury rules the third house. So this is going to make conversations pop again. Misunderstandings with siblings or neighbors is also third house, coworkers or extended family may finally clear up. There could be some resolution, finally having the conversation. Important news often comes in when we have this energy in the third house, or you might find the words that you've been searching for to say the thing that you need to say, where you haven't been quite sure how to say it, and you could finally figure out how to say it. Now, because Saturn is involved, these conversations aren't superficial, right? Nothing about Saturn is superficial. So they do require honesty, maturity, and this willingness to say what's really needed. Even if it's uncomfortable, it's got to be said. Now, as Saturn stations retrograde in your 12th house, you've entered this very deeply introspective period. Old fears, unconscious patterns, old beliefs that you've been carrying for years are likely going to come up to the surface. And not to hurt you, but to be evaluated and figure out what should you be taking with you and what do you need to get rid of. So rather than seeing this as something that you need to like fix, think of it as a period where you just need to exercise understanding for yourself. Because we all carry stories about ourselves that were written a long time ago. And so long ago, it was before we had the ability to actually question them. And Saturn is now giving us the ability to question them and ask what's true and what's not true about the story that I've been saying about myself and my life up to this point. Right? It's a very introspective energy. Then a few hours later, the nodes change, and this begins a brand new 18-month chapter. And that North Node enters your 10th house, while the South Node is moving into your fourth. So you're being asked to redefine what contribution means, not success according to somebody else's standards. It's not about status, it's not about the appearances and keeping up with the Joneses or whatever. It's really considering what you're here to build and what kind of legacy do you actually want to leave. Now, at the same time, you're releasing these old emotional conditions around what it means to be safe and secure. And sometimes, you guys can hold on to things and not because something is healthy, but because it's familiar, dancing with the devil that you know instead of dancing with the devil that you don't know, right? But over the coming months, you're going to start learning that familiarity and safety aren't always the same thing. And you're going to start to really very clearly differentiate between those two. Now that Aquarius full moon at the end of the month brings this entire story to a climax, right? That moon joins Pluto and Juno, both retrograde in your 10th house while opposing the sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in your fourth. Something can culminate here having to do with your career, your public life, or a leadership role. You could receive some sort of recognition. You could make some sort of significant decision, or just finally acknowledge that a professional path that you've been going after doesn't do it for you anymore. It just doesn't reflect who you are now and or who it is that you're looking to become. Now, emotionally, because the fourth house is involved, you can feel very pulled between your responsibilities and your personal life, right? Between this idea of achievement and peace, you know, should I go? Should I stay? Building a successful life, building a more meaningful one. I'm doing this because 10th house, fourth house, 10th house, the landlord is Capricorn, fourth house is Cancer, right? Just like naturally. So it's like between, facts and my emotions, reality and what I feel like I want to do, right? And you're having this tension. And keep in mind, when we have oppositions, it's not like one side wins. It's about sitting down and figuring it out, right? Building that successful life, 10th house, but building a meaningful one, which would be very fourth house, right? So again, it's not about choosing one over the other. It's to just stop believing that they have to actually exist separately. And then Jupiter reaches Cazimi, sitting in the heart of the sun. And after a bunch of weeks of examining your definition of what it means to be successful and secure and committed, Jupiter offers this super profound realization that home isn't simply a place that you live, it's the life that you create. It's the people who you allow in your life who allow you to be yourself. People who allow you the ability to just exhale and be yourself, right? It's a version of yourself that just no longer needs to earn, whether it's rest or worth or just justify your existence through this idea of constant productivity. So by the end of July, your outer circumstances may or may not look dramatically different, depends on what's in your personal chart, but your relationship to them is certainly going to look different. And sometimes that's where the biggest transformation begins, not by changing your life overnight, but by changing the meaning that you've attached to it along the way. Okay, my friend. So I hope that was helpful in some way. Taurus, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your month, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye. Hey, Gem, I hope you guys are doing amazing. So, for Gemini Rising, especially to a lesser degree, Gemini Sun, like me, or Gemini Moon, July is not just about asking you to learn something new, right? It's really asking you to take a hard look at the beliefs around the life that you've built. And I know that sounds like a very existential, huge problem, right? Every single one of us has a story to tell ourselves about how it all works, how the world works, what's possible, who we are, what we're capable of becoming. And some of those beliefs are awesome and they empower us. But a lot of the stories that we tell ourselves limit us without us even realizing it. And this month, that story is being rewritten. It kind of has no choice but to be rewritten. You could fight against it, but it's going to feel very natural. It should be, depending on what else is in your birth chart, working with these energies. But generally, for you guys, the story's being rewritten in a way that almost feels like there's some grace about it, right? And the heart of your chart is this powerful opposition between Jupiter and Hygeia in your third house and Pluto and Juno retrograde in your ninth house. If at first glance, this can look like a battle between the two houses, right? That everyday communication and higher learning, or, societal expectations and how it is that you really think. But psychologically, it's a lot more profound than that. This is about tension between what you've always known and what you're now being called to understand. So this can manifest in so many different ways, guys, because the ninth house, I'm just going to lay out what the ninth house is, and you could pull from it to apply to your own life, however, right? Because I can't hit every single, scenario, but that ninth house is the manifestation of father energy. It's very connected to father, grandfather energy. It's politics, okay? It's law, legalities, local governance, societal expectations on the one hand. It has to do with foreign land, foreign travels. It has to do with importing and exporting, publishing, marketing, getting something out there to the world, editing, higher education, teaching in higher education, studying in higher education. It's the house of philosophy, higher mindedness, anything that's higher minded. Okay. It is your worldview. It's a brilliant house. Jupiter is very expansive, right? Jupiter is the natural landlord of that house. So Jupiter is now in your third house, sitting opposite the house that he rules. So this isn't a bad thing. It's about coming to an understanding, right? Jupiter in the third house wants your mind to grow. It wants you to ask more questions, have deeper conversations. It wants you to write. It wants you to teach. It wants you to learn. It wants you to travel locally. It wants you to become curious again. But this isn't about just collecting information just for the sake of having it. It's about becoming open enough to realize that you don't have to keep thinking the way that you've always thought. It wants to expand who you really are. Because keep in mind, that third house is your house. You naturally live in the third house. And Jupiter is basically like inside of you saying, come on, let's grow, let's go. And a lot of you pride yourselves on being adaptable. But even the most open-minded people develop mental habits. We all do it. Those of us, especially those of us with heavy Gemini. We form opinions based on our upbringing, our experiences, our disappointments, and the messages that we've received throughout our life. And then over time, those beliefs can become so familiar that we mistake them for facts. Now, Jupiter comes in. He rules the house that God speaks to us in. The fifth house is the house that we co-create with God. The ninth house is the house that God speaks to us in. And he's asking, Gemini, what story have you been telling yourself? That's no longer the whole kit and caboodle. It's no longer the whole story. Where are you editing yourself out of the story that you've been telling yourself about your life, about your father, about your grandfather, about your siblings, about your extended family, about how capable you are to learn, about how well you write, how well you speak, how well you communicate? It's big. It's a big one. Now, Hygeia adds another layer, beautiful layer, to this transit by suggesting that healing begins with the mind. The way you speak to yourself matters. So I really think like your mind is the core thing that you have to understand, less than other people this month. The conversations that you allow into your life matter. The information that you consume matters. Even the words that you repeat, on the day to day, all of that becomes your inner landscape. So being very mindful of what you expose yourself to, especially in today's world. So many nutty things are going around, right? Really protecting yourself. If it makes you feel uncomfortable, shut it off. Walk away, change the conversation. Because that discomfort that you're feeling is this element of darkness that just wants to come in. And Jupiter is all about smacking that down. He really is, right? So he really wants you to recognize where are you feeling that discomfort and lean into that and see, why am I feeling this way? If you've been constantly telling yourself, I'm too old, it's too late, people like me don't get opportunities, I've always had to struggle, this is my story, this transit is really asking you to notice those messages to yourself. Pay attention to those narratives with compassion and grace instead of automatically accepting them as the truth, because chances are it's not the truth, even if it's your lived experience. If you sit and you reflect and you look, what bigger lesson is there for you to learn out of that experience? And I say that because then we have Pluto. And Pluto and Juno retrograde in your ninth house aren't interested in surface level anything, surface level learning, communication. No. They want change. They want transformation. They're challenging your philosophies, your spiritual beliefs, your political perspectives, your educational paths, anything that's connected to a legal situation you might be caught up in. long distance, fill in the blank, be it travel, relationships, whatever, and the bigger meaning that you've assigned to your life experiences. So something life has handed you needs to be, especially if it's been painful, needs to be considered. Because from what I'm seeing for the general archetype of Gemini, something painful has become the foundation of your worldview, where you stopped trusting because someone betrayed you. You stopped taking chances because something didn't work out, either years ago or 4 years, FOR years, right? Where you stop believing in yourself because somebody else's voice just became louder than your own, or the doors closing became louder than anything else, right? And Pluto is in there like, so what do we do with this belief, Gemini? Do we let it continue to imprison you so that you think it's protecting you? I'm not going to go after that thing. I'm not going to try to publish. I'm not going to try to teach. I'm not going to go after that thing that's going to expand me because it never worked out before. So why should it work out now? Right? But what you don't understand is that mindset is imprisoning you. You think it's to protect you, but it's really keeping you in this prison. So it is an uncomfortable question because a lot of times those ideas become such a part of our identity that when we try to let go of those ideas, we feel like we're letting go of a part of our identity. Letting go of those ideas can feel like losing a piece of yourself. And Juno retrograde working along with Pluto makes this even more personal. So you can find yourself reconsidering commitments you made to a particular path or education or philosophy or religion or even a dream that you've carried for what feels like forever. And a lot of you may just start to question whether you've been pursuing someone else's version of success instead of your own, or what you felt like society just kind of expected of you, or what you think society would have liked, even if no one even said anything to you. A lot of you are going to be feeling that. Others of you may discover that a teacher or a mentor or a belief system that once served you has just simply expired in your life. You're not aligned with it anymore. You're not resonating. This doesn't mean that you've been wrong. It means that you've grown. And that's a good thing. One of the healthiest signs of wisdom, ninth house is the house of wisdom, is allowing your perspective to evolve. Now, Neptune's supportive trine, which is coming from that 11th house, reminds you that growth doesn't happen in isolation. Pay attention to the people coming into your life right now, Gemini. Pay attention to the conversations that you're having with friends, with colleagues, or with like-minded people that can inspire things in very unexpected ways. Sometimes one discussion, one book, one email, a text, some sort of like random encounter changes the complete direction of your life. Pay attention to that. There are no accidents in this energy, okay? Now, when Mercury stations direct in your second house, clarity begins returning around second house things like finances and your values, what matters to you, your self-worth, and the choices that you're making because of that, right? Choices that you're making because of money or because of how stable you feel in your finances, and in your life. So, especially if you've been second guessing a financial decision or questioning your own value, the fog can lift here. And Saturn reminds you to build slowly and realistically is probably the best word. Slowly is one thing. But you always want to make sure that you're being realistic, especially with Saturn so involved in all of this. But Mercury gives you the confidence to finally move forward. And as Saturn stations retrograde in your 11th house, you're also reviewing your future. Which idea having to do with your future when it comes to your goals and gains and where it is that you're moving your life towards, which version is still good for you? Which friends are still good for you? Which friends, really try to keep you small or they don't accept you completely for who you are, right? What goal needs to be revisited because Saturn is asking for quality over quantity. So it's not about having this big grand thing. It's about having something a lot more meaningful, right? Saturn is far less interested in how many like people you know, um, and just having like a couple of good quality friends. Saturn's much more interested in you creating a future of quality rather than one of like riches and anything else, where it's this idea of quality and connected connection to yourself. Then the lunar nodes change signs, Aquarius and Leo, and they begin this powerful new 18-month cycle. The north node moving into your ninth house, while the south moves into your third. Your soul is being invited, north node in Aquarius, by the way, and it's south node in Leo in that third house. So your soul is being invited here to think bigger, go after what feels less familiar. This is about challenging your assumptions, right? So this beautifully aligns with the other energies of the month. So whether you are traveling literally or just psychologically, because the ninth house travel could also be the kind of travel that we do in our mind, right? Through books or museums or experiences, whatever it is. It's about going into territory that stretches your understanding of yourself and the world, right? Now, at the same time, you're being asked to release the need to have all the answers, right? Gemini, you guys are so curious. We are, well, I'm sure we have all been told that our entire life, those of us with heavy Gemini. But sometimes curiosity can become this constant mental activity, right? And that south node reminds you that wisdom isn't measured by how much information you gather. Sometimes wisdom comes from just sitting quietly with one question long enough for your life to answer it, for spirit to answer it. We have to be quiet enough and open enough to be able to hear God. And that Aquarius full moon at the end of the month brings this entire process to a turning point for you. The moon joining up with Pluto and Juno retrograde in your ninth house while opposing the sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in your third house. You may meet, a lot of you likely will reach this major realization about your future. Now, it can be connected to education. It doesn't mean that you're going back for another degree. It could just be maybe a certification or something, or looking at your spiritual path, or looking at your politics differently, or looking into getting published, or looking into traveling, or some of you might want to move to a foreign country, or just simply the direction that your life is taking. Like just simply the direction that your life is taking, but the path. I mean, that ninth house. So emotionally, you could feel this tension because the moon is involved between what feels comfortable and what feels expansive, right? What feels like a sure thing and what's possible. That could be a little nerve-wracking. You can feel this tension between staying within the boundaries of what it is that you've always believed and what it is that you're doing, and then or stepping into a much larger understanding of who you are, or at least who you want to become, and realizing that that person that you want to become is it's completely doable, but it's just going to require making some changes. And then Jupiter reaches Cazimi, and he's sitting right on the lap of the sun. So after weeks of questioning your beliefs, this can feel like such a huge moment of mental and spiritual clarity for you. You can suddenly realize that the greatest limitations that you've experienced in your life, it was never your circumstances. It was the story that you kept telling yourself about those circumstances. And those stories ended up driving how you handled and approached those things to have the particular outcome that you had. Realizing that at the end of the day, maybe not having enough faith in yourself, belief in yourself, was the main problem rather than the external thing, right? And that's the gift of Jupiter Cazimi. It's realizing that, maybe you were like, no, 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 I had A, B, and C qualification and I went for that thing and I went to go do that thing and it never worked out. Well, then you have to ask yourself, were you supposed to even be going after that thing in the first place? What motivated you to go after that thing in the first place? What made you think that that was the right thing for you? And even though that's the past and you're here now, this is the kind of thing where sometimes we have to look at the past to be able to move forward in the most effective way. And we have this Jupiter cazimi, Jupiter reaching cazimi. So this is about expanding your perspective just enough for you to see possibilities that were there all along, but that fear or habit or old conditioning prevented you from recognizing. And in this house, it might have been, you know, if your father or your grandfather or the men in your life did not build you up in a certain way, and this goes for you if you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter, but it has you rethinking all of that. Okay, that's not going to apply to a lot of you, but this is certainly going to be the case for many of you. By the end of the month, you probably won't have every answer. It doesn't work like that. But you're going to have much better questions. You're going to have better questions. You're going to have a lot more clarity. And sometimes that's really where the real transformation starts, right? It's not in finding the certainty, but it's being willing enough to see your life through an entirely new lens, not only your external life, but more so who you are. And that right there, friend, is what it's all about for this month. So that is what I have for you for the second half of July. I hope that was helpful for you. Thanks for hanging with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hi, Cancer Rising. I hope you guys are doing great. Let's talk about the second half of July. A lot of you are being asked to redefine the whole idea of worth to you, not by what you do for other people, but by who you are when you're no longer trying to be the thing that everybody needs you to be, right? Whether it's a relationship connected to love, whether it's something connected to security or acceptance, whatever it is, that's kind of like the center of your chart for this month. The major story this month for you, though, is this very powerful opposition between Jupiter and Hygeia in your second house and Pluto and Juno retrograde in your eighth house. Now, on the surface, a lot of astrologers describe this as the axis of like your money versus other people's money, or your resources versus shared resources. And yes, those themes can certainly show up for a lot of you. That is so surface, because I feel like there's something much deeper going on because of it's not only about Jupiter and Pluto. Hygeia is involved, Juno is involved, and this is where it really is about the idea of power. It's about worth, it's about trust, it's about vulnerability, and the invisible emotional contracts that you've been carrying for years. Now, Jupiter moving through your second house is asking you a very important question about value, worth, what matters to you, your sense of self-worth, what matters to you as far as your possessions, as far as money, your sense of self, and it's very normal for you to sit and if I were to just say this to you, for you to just start spewing off a whole laundry list of things like that you do. Like, I'm a good wife, good husband, good boyfriend, good girlfriend, good parent, good brother, sister. I'm a hard worker. I'm always there for everyone. I'm successful or not, whatever it is. But those things do not answer the question for the second house energy. That's all very descriptive. Those are very, they're adjectives, right, in nature when it comes to your behavior, right? But it's got nothing really to do with your worth. And that's where this transit becomes incredibly healing, because one of your greatest gifts is the ability to care for other people. You just instinctively know when someone is hurting, Cancer, even when they haven't said a word. You remember birthdays, you notice these subtle shifts in people's moods, you anticipate their needs before they're spoken. It's one of the most beautiful qualities of Cancer. I love the sign of Cancer. My twin boys are Cancers, and they're the nicest. I'll give you a basic example of why I love you guys. Like my one son, Peter, he's can't, they're both wonderful, Peter, but Peter will always like come my water bottle. He'll always come and just check my water bottle to see if I need it like filled up, if I need it tapped off. Whenever he passes me, he'll always just think to do that. That's such a silly little thing, but they both do that with like the larger things. Like, I don't have to ask. It's not something that they would even think to ask. It's just something that he consistently does, right? So this mindfulness, this thoughtfulness, this loving nature, it's just who you guys are. But every single gift carries a shadow. And one of the hardest habits for you guys to recognize is that you can become so good at taking care of everyone else that slowly you begin measuring your value by how indispensable you might become. So you become that emotional anchor and the caretaker and the peacekeeper and the one that everybody calls when they need something. And over time, without even realizing it, a quiet belief can begin forming underneath all of that, where you start truly understanding that if people don't need you, maybe they won't choose you. And that's painful to recognize. And most of you, this is not a say it out loud kind of thing. But Pluto has a way of uncovering these questions that we could spend years of avoiding. And Pluto and Juno retrograde in your eighth house aren't simply transforming your relationships and and money through other people. They're transforming the psychology underneath your relationships. And Pluto is really asking this question that can feel super uncomfortable, where, have you at some point confused the idea of being needed with being loved? Because they're not the same thing. And I know in your conscious mind, you likely know that. You likely know that, but what we think in our mind is completely separate from our emotions and what it is that we feel, right? Because being needed creates this obligatory kind of energy, right? Being loved creates freedom. It's the two very different things. Being needed says, I don't know what I'd do without you kind of thing. Thank goodness you're here. And even if somebody is being really, appreciative, I appreciate you so much. But it's this idea that you always need to be here, whereas being loved is I love you even when I don't need you to come in and run in and help me. I don't need you to rest. I love you anyway, right? And there's a huge, huge difference here. And the eighth house is where we merge emotionally with other people. It is where we trust. It's where we become quite vulnerable. And it's where we share our fears and our grief, because the eighth house is we're with another person here. We share our finances, our intimacy, our power and just the parts of ourselves that we usually keep hidden. It's what we choose to share with somebody else. Now, ironically, you guys often feel a lot more comfortable taking care of somebody else's vulnerabilities than revealing your own, right? You're the one asking, how are you? What can I do? How can I help, right? But then when somebody asks you, how often do you actually answer that honestly? Do you automatically like go into the I'm fine, I'm good. What's going on with you? Do you need anything? Or you just change the subject in general? This month is asking you to stop managing everybody else's emotions long enough to become curious about your own because Juno retrograde is adding this beautiful, profound layer where you're reviewing every commitment because Juno, especially retrograde, very connected to this idea of commitment. Well, Juno is always connected to commitment, but the retrograde has you thinking very deeply about this inside of yourself. So you'll be thinking about every commitment that you've ever made, not just in marriage or partnerships in your relationships, but even in the silent promises that you've made throughout your life. Maybe somewhere along the way you decided, I'm going to be the strong one here. I'm going to keep the family together. I'm going to make sure everyone else is okay. I don't want to burden other people with my problems. And those comments or that internal conversation, those comments, those are contracts, whether you realize it or not. Not the kind that just the sign, I know it's more metaphorical, but there are these contracts that hang out in your energy, in your consciousness, and in your soul. And, and you end up living by them. So Pluto, the second half of July, wants to know who in the world wrote those contracts in the first place. And do they even still reflect the person that you're becoming? Because the reality is, healthy relationships don't require one person to carry all the emotional weight. And I don't care who this relationship is with, whether it's with a significant other, a family member, a friend, whatever it is, right? They don't ask one person to continually sacrifice themselves so that everyone else can be comfortable. It's not about that. Love and self-abandonment are not the same thing. Let me say that again. Love and self-abandonment are not the same thing. They're just not. And one of the most liberating realizations you're likely going to have this month is recognizing that setting a boundary doesn't make you less loving. Is it going to be comfortable for you? Probably not. Boundaries are not always easy for cancers. And it's not even because you're not willing. It's not. It's because you want to just be really helpful. And a boundary line can maybe it's mean, and it's not mean. It just makes the connection more honest. Again, like this idea, and I feel like I've been speaking about this idea of self-erasure for a long time. We all realize, as a collective, on in a very personal way, we all have to realize where we've been erasing ourselves in the name of keeping something going, right? And we need boundaries. We need boundaries again to keep it all honest. Now, Neptune's coming into the scene. Neptune is trining quite beautifully from the 10th house, which is reminding you that your purpose is evolving right alongside your identity. They're not happening independent of each other, right? So a lot of you are really starting to feel called toward work that has greater meaning. And I must have said this a million times on my channel. You guys have to love what you're doing. If you don't believe in it, or it just feels really contrary, and to do it for a minute is one thing, but to have it like as your career over the long term, you've got to believe in it. Otherwise, it's super difficult for you to stay in it, right? So a lot of you are going to just feel called towards work that has more greater meaning for you, whatever that means. Others of you are going to be redefining what success actually even looks like, and you might discover that fulfillment matters a lot more than recognition. And I'm saying this because on a very soul level, that idea of fulfillment and aligning with what it is that you do, if you're not connecting with that yet, it's only a matter of time. That's what people with heavy Cancer energy are meant to feel, whether you're Cancer rising or a Cancer sun or a Cancer moon, right? That piece matters more than proving yourself. The impact that you're going to make in that way, whatever it is, matters more than status, right? Listen to those quiet nudges. You're going to be getting them, and they're leading you towards something that's just more aligned with who you're becoming. And then when Mercury stations direct in your first house, something shifts inside of you. And this is less about external events. It's really more about your own voice. Because for weeks you've been reflecting on who you are and how you present yourself and what's next, right? Where are you headed next? What is it all going to look like? Now the fog begins to lift. You may finally say something that you've needed to say once Mercury rules communication, make a decision you've been postponing, or just simply realize that you've been asking everyone else what they think while quietly ignoring your own intuition about something. And Mercury is going to be reminding you that your voice deserves to be the biggest part of that conversation as well. It needs to matter. And then Saturn stations retrograde in your 10th house of career, public reputation, standing in the world, and your long-term goals. And this is a serious review of your ambitions, your responsibilities, and the identity that you've built around achievement. Now, a lot of you often carry enormous responsibility without complaining. I know, okay? But Saturn is asking you to do something different. He's asking you to first start by recognizing, like, why do you do that? Who are you trying to prove what to? Because sometimes we're chasing goals that just, they either no longer belong to us or they never belonged to us in the first place. Maybe we started chasing that goal because it sounded good in the moment years ago, or it aligns with that version of ourselves that we wanted to be years ago. But sometimes, Cancer, we're exhausting ourselves trying to live up to expectations that we inherited decades ago from other people, right? And what we're supposed to do. And sometimes we're so busy building a successful life that we forget to ask whether we're actually really enjoying it. And Saturn isn't asking you to give up on your dreams. It's asking you to make sure that they're actually yours, especially if you grew up in a house where, like, maybe your parents or your family members were working because they had to, and it wasn't about doing what they loved. Or, do you know what I mean? It's like that's how you view work now. It's like just something that you have to do. And if you don't mind it, it's okay, right? These are just going to become more you're just going to be more mindful of this dynamic. And then the lunar nodes change signs like a half a day later after Saturn goes retrograde. And that north node it moves into your eighth house, while that south node in Leo, north node in Aquarius, south node in Leo goes into your second house. This starts an entirely new 18-month chapter having to do with your second house, eighth house axis. So your soul is learning that strength isn't found in carrying everything alone. It's not. It's in by allowing healthy reciprocity, right? Allowing the support and the intimacy and allowing people to show up for you in the same way that you've always shown up for them, right? Because true closeness is not created by one person constantly giving, giving, giving. It's created when both people feel safe enough to receive, right? And that's really important. And it's beautiful. And then we have the Aquarius full moon. This is where the emotional story reaches its peak, right? That moon joins Pluto and Juno again, both still retrograde while opposing the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia. Something hidden comes to light. Now, because of the houses, maybe it's a financial matter, or maybe it's some sort of relationship dynamic, or maybe it's just this realization that you've been carrying these emotional burdens that were never yours to carry. And the full moon is asking you to really look at that. Can you allow yourself to be loved without having to earn it first? And what does that even look like, without apologizing or without feeling guilty? Can you trust that you are present? Can you trust that who you are and just the presence that you have is enough? Right? I'm really thinking about these things. And then Jupiter reaches Cazimi, and it's working very powerfully with the sun. It's right on top of the sun there. And I love the symbolism for you because after the entire month of examining your worth and your relationships and your fears and your emotional patterns, Jupiter offers you this profound breakthrough where you begin to understand something your heart has always needed to hear. Your value has never come from how much you give. Your value has never depended on how much people rely on you. And it's never been determined by how much you give up or sacrifice for a person or a situation. Your value has always been there. It's always existed long before you tr you carried somebody else's load. I was going to say before you tried to fix anyone. Maybe some of you are fixers, right? Or let's say rescued anybody or constantly putting yourself out on the line, right? Long before you became that dependable one. But by the end of the month, you may still be making practical decisions around money and relationships and shared responsibility and all that stuff. But internally, something very important is starting to change, where you're beginning to understand that love doesn't require that self-sacrifice, that strength doesn't require emotional isolation, and that maybe for the first time in a very long time, you're realizing that allowing yourself to be cared for and just loved in a very intimate way can be one of the bravest things that you'll ever do. Okay, my friend. So that is what I have for you for the second half of July. I hope that was helpful in some way. Thanks for hanging with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Okay, Leo rising, let's go. To a lesser degree, sun and moon, but if you're a Leo sun, a Leo moon, still listen to this. You can still glean information and then you try to layer everything. Okay, I have a lot to say for you guys, right? The second half of July, I think, is extraordinarily important for you because so much of the astrology is happening directly across your first and seventh house axis, and those are very core angular houses. This means that the central story for you guys is about big things like identity and relationships and power and commitment and healing and just the way you redefine who you are in a relationship, not only to yourself, first house, but to other people, seventh house, right? Definitely a turning point. There's nothing light about your energy this month. So let's break it down. Let's talk about that first little section from the 19th to the 22nd. Major event is that Jupiter at 4 degrees in your sign. It's in Leo. It's conjuncting Hygeia at 1 degree in your energy as well in Leo in your first house. And this is opposing Pluto retrograde at 4 degrees in Aquarius and Juno retrograde at 5 degrees in Aquarius in your seventh house. So what does this mean? This is powerful because Jupiter in your first is expanding your sense of self. It's asking you to take up more space. Like, do you know what I mean? It's really pushing you to expand your life, trust your growth, step into a larger version of your identity. But with Hygeia there, it's not only about confidence or visibility. It's not about that. It's about healing yourself. It's about recovering parts of you that may have been suppressed, diminished, or shaped around other people's expectations. So for a lot of you, this can feel like a deep, deep remembering of who you actually are. Now, at the same time, Pluto and Juno retrograde in your seventh house is bringing this very intense transformation through relationships. It can involve marriage, committed partnerships, business partnerships, clients, or any one-on-one connection that you have where power, loyalty, obligation, or emotional contracts are involved. Some of the house could even be your doctors, by the way, if you're dealing with doctors, okay? Now, Pluto opposing Jupiter can magnify the tension between your growth and someone else's needs for control and stability and certainty. So as you expand, certain relationships have to adjust, right? So if a partnership has been based on an older version of you, that dynamic has likely become impossible to ignore, right? Now, Juno retrograde makes this even more relational, right? Juno is very connected to relationships. So you may be reviewing the promises that you've made or the roles that you've accepted and the relationship patterns that have defined your life within that connection. So some commitments may deepen through honesty in this energy for sure. Others may reveal where they've become so restrictive, so toxic, so unequal. Lack of equality can be a big thing here, right? Remember, seventh house is the house of the scales, right? Um, which is psychologically heavy and unhealthy, right? Becomes super obvious, right? And the deeper question here is not whether you should choose yourself or choose the relationship. That's not what this is about. The deeper realization is that any relationship worth keeping has to allow the real you to exist. And so if you are being the real you and you're not just going along to get along, how is that panning out? You know, and Jupiter and Hygeia in your energy is also trining Neptune retrograde in Aries in your ninth house. And this gives the entire configuration of very spiritual and visionary quality. It just does. That's Neptune in the ninth is about very much about expanding your beliefs and your faith and your worldview, your sense of meaning. So you may feel called to a larger life, some sort of new truth, a different philosophy, or just a more inspired direction. Now, at the same time, Pluto and Juno in Aquarius is sextiling Neptune in Aries, which means that even difficult relationship realizations can become part of a larger spiritual wake up, right? A relationship issue may not simply be about the other person, right? It could be about showing you how much your beliefs about love and loyalty and freedom and identity have changed. You know, and not allow, see, the thing is with this energy is not going to allow you to hide from yourself. If does that make sense? Right? You're not going to be able to hide from it, right? Now, moving on to July 23rd, Mercury is stationing direct in Cancer in your 12th house while conjuncting Kronos at 16 degrees Cancer, also conjuncting Hades in Cancer and squaring Saturn and Aries in your ninth house. Ooh, this is deeply internal transit for you guys, very internal. Mercury stationing direct in the 12th. This can bring clarity around something that's been hidden, that's been unconscious, that's been very emotionally confusing, difficult to pinpoint, kind of this thing that's just been riding beneath the surface, where once it goes direct, you can finally understand why something has felt so heavy. So you might recognize an old fear or an old grief or even an old family pattern or a private emotional burden that's been affecting you a lot more than you've realized or that you've been wanting to acknowledge. Now, with Kronos involved, this can connect to authority or responsibility, the idea of maturity and being mature and what that means, leadership, or even family structures, right? And with Hades involved, something buried or neglected rises to the surface. So it can feel a little uncomfortable at first. This is not cozy energy, but it can be very cathartic, very cleansing. Is Hades typically points to things that have been pushed aside, that have been pushed underneath, that have been underestimated, not looked at, just left in the shadows, right? Um, and so we're shining some light in those areas right at the end of this month. Now, the square to Saturn in Aries in your ninth house adds pressure around beliefs and truth and legal matters. What else is ninth house? Education, faith, travel, long-term vision. It's the manifestation of father energy. There could be tensions surrounding father energy, or grandfather energy even. What else? Isn't law, legalities, governance, publishing, marketing, advertising, higher education, your worldview, right? So this can be a moment when you realize an old belief system no longer supports the person that you're becoming, right? It may also, very likely, at least for a healthy handful of you, bring a serious conversation, a delayed realization, or just the need to make a very mature decision based on a truth rather than avoidance. So for a lot of you, this is a private reckoning, right? Before you can step more fully into that new identity, Jupiter is opening for you. Mercury in the 12th is asking you to clear out that old mental and emotional stuff that you've been quietly carrying that have been shaping your choices for years, right? And so is again this idea of cathartic healing is going to be happening. Now moving forward to July 26th to the 27th, we do have Saturn going retrograde and the nodes shifting like a half a day later. So it's like the 26th into the 27th, we have Saturn stationing retrograde in Aries in your ninth house, which begins a review of your beliefs, your future direction. For a lot of you, your education, your spiritual life, your legal matters, publishing, your teaching path, just your broader sense of purpose, right? And Saturn retrograde here does ask you to slow down and look at these things, um, especially your worldview, right? Because this question isn't about simply like what you believe, but whether those beliefs are strong enough to support the life that you're building. And for some of you, this can involve returning to school or rethinking a course of study or reviewing some sort of legal situation, legal matter, or questioning religious or philosophical beliefs or political views or restructuring your long-term plans. So psychologically, it can feel like realizing that that old map just like no longer matches your territory anymore. It just doesn't, right? And then the lunar node shift, right? And so this is big for you because that north node going into Aquarius in your seventh house, this is across the wheel from you because the south node is in your energy now in your first house, beginning an 18-month karmic cycle across the self relationship axis. So obviously pretty big for you. Now that south node in your first is asking you to release outgrown ego patterns and old identities and old defenses and ways of being that may have once protected you. At one point, it was the right way to be. But now you're realizing that it's limiting you. It's limiting your growth. And this doesn't mean that you're meant to become smaller by any stretch at all. It means that you're learning the difference between what it means to be authentic, right? What does authentic selfhood mean? And identity patterns that are built around these things that just aren't serving you anymore, like pride or performance or self-protection or needing to be seen in a certain way. None of those things are serving you anymore. And the North Node in Aquarius in your seventh is pulling you toward a more conscious and equal and future-oriented type of relationship in that seventh house, which could be a significant other, but it could also be a business partner. It could be your clients. It could be people who you serve, right? You're right, because you're now learning to be fully yourself while also allowing true partnership, right? So you're learning that intimacy doesn't require control and that independence doesn't require emotional distance. And that is that's a weird dynamic for a lot of you to like really absorb, like to really metabolize that. Now, over the next 18 months, relationships become one of your greatest teachers. They just do. There's no question. And not because you're meant to lose yourself in them or anything like that, but because this is where you still attach to versions of yourself that, no longer reflect who you're becoming. So really pay attention to any moments of like disease or, disconnect or challenges there, right? Because those moments of pressure or tension, that's where the learning is. And just pulling back and saying, okay, what's really going on here? Is this my issue or is it the issue with the other person? And what is it? Is it that I feel like the scales aren't being exercised, meaning things aren't fair, things aren't transparent. I don't know all the information. What am I feeling? Like, what's going on here? Because you're going to feel like you need transparency, know what's going on, and have things be fair. You might be told that you haven't been very fair and balanced. You might be the one delivering that to somebody else. Maybe you both feel like that at the same time. And that has to be a conversation so that understanding and empathy could happen. Now, moving forward to the 29th, we have the full moon in Aquarius and Jupiter Cazimi in your sign. Now, the full moon in Aquarius on the 29th brings everything to a culmination, right? The moon conjuncts Pluto and Juno retrograde, again in that seventh, opposing the Sun, Hygeia, and Jupiter, all in the first. So it's not just the Sun and the Moon. There were other energies happening here. So this is one of the most powerful relationship and identity moments, certainly of the month. I mean, there's no question about that, but probably of the summer for you. A full moon reveals, right? It brings what's been building into consciousness. It reveals it, right? And in your seventh house, this can bring a turning point in a marriage, in a partnership, a business relationship, a client relationship, or some sort of close one-on-one connection. And with Pluto involved, and the emotional truth can feel pretty intense because that's only how he rolls. And with Juno retrograde involved, the focus is on commitment, loyalty, and whether the relationship contract still reflects who both of you are now. I'm really being honest about that. Now, the opposition to the Sun and Jupiter and Hygeia in your sign makes it super personal. So you may clearly see where a relationship supports your healing and growth, or where it's been built around this older version of you. And you can also recognize where you've been over-identifying with being strong or admired or needed or even in control. Okay. Now, this full moon can expose relationship power dynamics. There's no question about it. But it can also create the conditions for a deeper and much more honest bond. So I don't want you to look at this as a negative thing. Pluto doesn't always destroy things, but he does reveal what's real and what can evolve to become stronger and what can't evolve in this kind of situation can become just way too heavy and hard to carry, you know? So it's that kind of thing. It's like if the connection is real and there's value there, it will be fine and probably better and deeper. But if it's not, if it's based on the wrong things, that's where it's going to become a little difficult. Now, at the same time, Jupiter reaches Cazimi in your sign, which is sitting right on the sun in your first house. This is a major moment for you of illumination. After all of the Jupiter-Pluto opposition pressure and the relationship intensity, after the Mercury 12th house clearing and the Saturn 9th house review, blah, 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 right? Jupiter Cazimi brings this breakthrough in self-understanding, right? It's where you're remembering your goodness and really looking at your confidence, not the version of you that performs confidence, the version of you that feels quietly confident because it's connected to who you really are, right? This is not connecting to the version of you that's always trying to make everybody else happy or the part of you that needs to be admired and approved of, you know? It's none of that. It's the real Leo, right? And that Jupiter Cazimi in your first, it really can bring a renewed faith in yourself, which I love. a much clearer sense of purpose, a a much more powerful realization about your identity. You can recognize that your growth can't be negotiated away to just preserve relationships that only work when you're smaller. I do want to say that it being your first house, the first house is a bit of a wild card house, right? It really can manifest in any other part of your life, but it is the path that you're walking on in life, right? So I feel like for a lot of you, there's going to be this aha moment about how it is that you want to move your life forward, like what you're doing for work, or where it is that you live, or just changes that you fundamentally want to make in your day to day. These things are going to become very real. Now, by the end of the month, you're being asked to just stand more fully in yourself while also becoming a lot more honest about all of the relationships that you have in your life. And it's not about choosing yourself over others or any of that, but it's just allowing only those relationships that can meet the truth of who you're becoming without making you feel bad or without trying to keep you small. The second half of the month for you guys is completely about personal rebirth. It's asking you to release old ego patterns, heal your relationship with visibility, really look at your commitments and reclaim your right to grow. And with this Jupiter Cazimi in your sign, the month closes just with such a powerful message that you're not here to become some version or idea of yourself that other people can manipulate or manage, or where you're just being what it is that they need for you to be. You're here to become whole. And whatever that means to you, that's going to mean something a bit different to each of you, right? Depending on what's in your personal birth chart and where your progress chart sits and all of that. But this idea of whole and authentic. Okay, my friends? So that is what I have for you. I hope that was helpful in some way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hi, Virgo Rising. For you guys, the second half of July is deeply, deeply internal. That doesn't mean it's going to be quiet. It's just internal, right? For you guys, probably one of the most psychologically revealing periods of the month because so much of your astrology is activating the hidden places in the chart, which would be the 12th house, the 6th house, the 8th house, and the 11th house, right? These are very important for you guys. So very much about your inner life, your health, your work patterns. Um, and I say this, it doesn't sound like it's under the same umbrella, but it is your nervous system, your obligations, and these unconscious agreements that you've made with stress and responsibility and service. Because you've made these unconscious, like contractual agreements that you signed somewhere along the way. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Now, at the center of the month is this opposition between Jupiter and Hygeia in Leo in your 12th house and Pluto retrograde and Juno retrograde in Aquarius in your 6th house. So the 6th house, 12th house, very powerful axis because it brings together the unseen 12th house and the everyday, which is 6th house. That 12th house shows what's hidden, what's behind the curtain, right? It's very private, very spiritual, very unconscious, very unspoken, very connected to the subconscious. Um, yeah, just things that are hidden. Whereas that 6th house shows your day-to-day routines, your work, your health. 6th house is the house of health, labor, service, and the way that you manage your day-to-day life. Now, Jupiter and Hygeia in your 12th is asking for some deep restoration. Restoration is not like a nap, okay? When I'm asking you to take a nap, this is about it's not about the surface level kind of rest. This is soul rest. This is the kind of healing that requires you to notice how much you've been carrying quietly, how much pressure you have normalized, and how often you keep functioning even when something inside you is asking you to chill out and just rest, just stop for a minute. It's not easy for you guys. A lot of you guys are naturally wired to improve and solve and analyze and serve and do, right? You notice what needs to be done. You quickly assess what's out of place. You see what other people have missed. This is a gift, right? But this month reveals the cost of always being the one who notices stuff. Jupiter in the 12th is expanding your unconscious and it's bringing to the surface these things that you've been hiding, these emotions and these buried fears and this private grief and the spiritual longing and the old patterns into awareness. And with Hygeia there, the theme is healing. And it's healing what's been stored in the body and in the psyche. This can bring a much stronger need for sleep, for solitude, for prayer, for reflection, for therapy, or simply time away from this constant stimulation. And I'm going to tell you, if you don't do it for yourself, this is going to manifest in your body. Pay attention to your lower back. Pay attention to the tension in your shoulders, because that's where this stuff is going to manifest. Also, because it's 12th house, your feet. Believe it or not, your feet. Okay, so paying attention to all of these, all right? But the message is pretty clear that your healing cannot happen if your life never gives you the space to heal yourself. If you're on constantly keeping yourself busy, and I get it. Oh my gosh, I work with so many of you that it's almost like every moment of your day is accounted for. I totally get it. But you can't heal if you don't schedule yourself in a healing way. I don't mean schedule yourself in to drink 3 or 4 glasses of wine. Although, having a couple, nothing wrong with that. But you want to make sure that you're allowing yourself to kind of decompress in a good, healthy way. Now, across the wheel, we have Pluto and Juno retrograde in Aquarius, and they're working through that 6th house. And this brings a lot of intensity to your work, to your health, mental, physical, emotional, to your routines, responsibilities, your coworkers, your employees, your clients, and the systems that you basically live inside of every day, right? That's that 6th house is like your dry cleaner or the nail tech who does your nails or the people who work for you or work with you, right? Pluto in the 6th often exposes where daily life has become unsustainable, right? It's going to be showing you where work has just become too consuming, where the idea of service, 6th house, right, has become self-erasure, where health symptoms that you've been dealing with can be, will, are connected to stress, and where routines that once helped you now control you. Juno retrograde adds another layer on this. It adds this theme of obligation and commitment. So you could be reviewing work contracts and caregiving roles. Maybe you're taking care of an elderly parent or a family member, or a spouse, or someone who matters to you. Looking at your professional responsibilities or promises you made to be useful. Promises that you made, like, I'm going to help you, I'm going to be there, kind of thing, that idea of being dependable and available and efficient in all of that. Some of those commitments may still be meaningful, but others may be draining you because they were built around this older version of you that believed being needed was the same thing as being secure. And this opposition can feel like this tug of war between your inner life and these outer responsibilities. Parts of you need rest and you need the privacy, you need the spiritual renewal, that decompression. But another part of you sees the list, the deadline, the job, the obligation, the thing, the health issue, the person depending on you, whatever it is, right? The deeper lesson is that burnout is not proof of devotion. And this is typically something that you guys learn the hard way. Being exhausted is not evidence that you are doing enough, right? And this constantly being useful is not the same thing as being well. It's just not. Now, during that like the 19th to the 22nd, this outer planet basket configuration becomes really powerful because Jupiter and Hygeia in Leo are trining Neptune retrograde in Aries in your 8th house, while that Pluto and Juno in Aquarius are sextiling Neptune in Aries. So Neptune in that 8th house for you guys, this brings a spiritual and emotional layer to issues around 8th house things, intimacy, shared resources, inheritance, debt, taxes, sex, trust, grief, vulnerability, psychological entanglements, and even psychological releases. So the trine from Jupiter suggests that some deep inner healing is possible now, especially when you let yourself to let go of control. This is not about figuring it out, Virgo. It's about allowing what's been buried to soften up just long enough so that you can understand it and what's been going on. Now, there's a sextile from Pluto and Juno to Neptune, which is suggesting that there are these changes going on in your routines and your work and your, again, going back to your health. They're all connected to this deeper emotional and energetic reality that you're living. So a work problem may actually reveal an intimacy issue. A health pattern may reveal an emotional burden, especially with the back, with the shoulders, or the feet right now, right? A daily obligation may expose this deeper fear of disappointing others or losing control or not being safe unless you're constantly managing everything. Stomach issues can also be an issue here. Sixth house rules the stomach, okay? Um, yeah. So for a lot of you, this is about just this profound clarifying because it's asking you to stop treating symptoms as these isolated problems and start paying attention to the larger problem, the larger pattern that's revealing itself. It's all connected for you guys. Now, on the 23rd, Mercury stations direct in Cancer in your 11th house, while it's conjuncting Kronos at 16 degrees in Cancer, also conjuncting Hades in Cancer and squaring Saturn in Aries in your 8th house. So, what does all that mean, right? This is going to bring movement and clarity around 11th house things. So, friendships, groups, your professional networks, your communities, your long-term goals and gains. 11th house is very connected to money for your future as well. And the people with whom you share your hopes for the future, right? So who are your people? And now that Mercury direct in the 11th can bring a conversation back around, clarify some sort of group dynamic, reconnect you with someone, or help you understand where it is that you truly belong moving forward now. Now, with Kronos involved, there can be themes around the idea of like being the boss or leadership or what a boss represents in your life, right? This idea of authority or maturity or people in positions of influence, right? Whether you're the person or whether you're dealing with people who hold those positions. Now, with Hades involved, something neglected or uncomfortable within either a friendship, an organization, or a community rises to the surface. And this can involve realizing that a group, whether it's a professional network or a group of friends, whatever it is, no longer feel emotionally safe to you, that a friendship has been quietly draining or that a long-term goal needs to be re-examined. And it's squaring this Saturn in your 8th house, which makes it a little more serious. This is not simply about your social life, right? I mean, this really likely involves trust, shared resources, emotional vulnerability, debt, inheritance, grief, intimacy, or just this real legit fear of depending on other people. Now, a conversation with a friend, a partner, a collaborator, or I don't know, someone in your community can show you where you're ready for much deeper honesty. Really getting serious about that. And it's all of it is connected to your future. So for a lot of you, this could also be just about letting people support you. Because you are often comfortable being very helpful. You're very helpful, but not always comfortable being helped. Mercury direct makes it clear which connections can hold real truth and which ones only work when you're the one keeping everything functional. And I really relate with this, right, with you guys, because while I'm a Gemini sun, my sun, a lot of you know this, is in my 6th house. So while I'm a Gemini sun, I'm also a Virgo sun in that way because I experience my Gemini sun through the lens of Virgo. So you guys should all know that as well. You should know what house your sun sits in, because that's also the energy that you're experiencing it. Okay. So if you have it in the 1st house, your sun is in the 1st house, regardless of what your sign is in, you're experiencing it through the lens of Aries. So Aries energy would give you more information about your transits and about your experience. Okay. Now moving on to July 26th to the 27th, we have Saturn stationing retrograde in Aries in your 8th house. And this begins a deeper review of intimacy and trust and shared finances and taxes, debt, inheritance, investments, all kinds of psychological entanglements, grief. Um, what else? Did I say sex and intimacy? I think I did. All of that, right? Now, Saturn is heavy. He is responsible. He's not bad. He's good. He's good. But he likes honesty and he wants truth and he wants stability and he wants long term. So Saturn retrograde in the eighth is asking you to become more mature in how you share your power and your vulnerability. It's asking you to examine where fear has likely made you overly self-reliant or guarded or controlling or reluctant to receive support. It is likely also going to require some practical responsibility around financial agreements, any kind of joint accounts, loans, legal matters, or resources shared with another person. Now, psychologically, this is about the places where you've learned to protect yourself by staying in control, right? Saturn now is asking whether those protections are still necessary or whether they've just simply become walls that prevent you from being more deeply and authentically intimate with other people in your life, maybe in relationship or even just more honest, right, within your closest relationship. And then about a half a day later, the lunar nodes shift, right? And the north node goes into Aquarius in your sixth house and the south node into Leo in your 12th house. And this is beginning an 18-month cycle across your work, health, service, and your spiritual axis. This is very important for you guys because that south node in Leo in your 12th begins releasing unconscious ego patterns and hidden pride and private fears and old self-protective habits and these identities that have been operating behind the scenes, um, where you have felt like less than, where you felt victimized, where you have been victimized. But just realizing that by holding on to these things, you're punishing yourself, right? It doesn't mean forgetting, but it means just forgiving and moving on, right? But this can also include a belief that you have to handle everything alone, the habit of quietly suffering, or the tendency to retreat rather than ask for what you actually need. And then maybe even be kind of upset about it and quiet. Now, the North Node in Aquarius in your sixth house is pulling you towards healthier systems. And I like this for you because you guys naturally live in the sixth house. This is about better routines, more sustainable work, more liberated relationships with the idea of service. And Aquarius is asking you to innovate. So you're needing to do things differently. It's asking you to stop doing things simply because you've always done it a particular way. Over the next year and a half, your growth comes through restructuring your daily life so that it actually supports the future that you want to have. Now, in this nodal shift, really does remind you that healing isn't only emotional. Healing is logistical as well. It's built into your calendar. It's your boundaries, it's your work habits, it's your sleep, your nutrition, your support systems, and the way that you stop saying yes to responsibilities that you know damn well are just slowly, maybe not even so slowly, draining your energy. Now, finally, at the end of the month, on the 29th, we have the full moon in Aquarius, which brings everything to a peak, as full moons do. And the moon conjuncts Pluto and Juno retrograde in your sixth house, while opposing the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia and Leo in your 12th house. So, this is a major culmination around work, health, routines, service, and even responsibilities. So, something in your daily life may become impossible to ignore. Whatever it is, it could be a work dynamic that can reach a turning point, a health issue that you can't ignore anymore, that requires attention, a caregiving role that needs some kind of boundaries, a routine can just show itself as being unsustainable. And with Pluto involved, the realization can feel super intense, right? But honest. Intense, but honest, because Pluto shows you what's been controlling you from beneath the surface. And there's just not going to be any way of like pushing it down anymore, right? And with that Juno retrograde there, the full moon highlights commitments that need to be renegotiated. So this can be a job commitment or your connection to what it is that you do day to day. Like you might need to renegotiate your hours at work because you have something else going on over in this part of your life, some caregiving agreement, a health commitment, or just some sort of unspoken promise that you'd always be available, always competent, always useful, always fine. You might need to have the conversation like, guess what? I'm not always fine. I have this thing going on and so you need to renegotiate like that day to day and how it is that you're living. Now, the opposition to the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in the 12th makes the message pretty clear that your inner life matters and your health matters as much as your productivity. So you can't continue betraying your need for rest and still call it responsibility. You can't do it anymore. It's not honest, right? As we go into the end of July, you can't keep ignoring your body and still call it like discipline or, over functioning and just keep calling it like service or just being helpful, right? And then at the end of the month, Jupiter enters Cazimi in Leo in your 12th house, again, sitting in the heart of the sun. This is a very profound private awakening for you. It may be well, it's the 12th house, so it's very behind the scenes, right? So it's not loud, it's not very external, it's not visible to everyone around you, but internally you could feel like this real spiritual breakthrough because Jupiter Cazimi in the 12th can bring grace, it can bring protection, inner guidance, a deep realization about something that you've been carrying unconsciously. So you finally understand why a pattern has repeated, or you may feel ready to forgive yourself. You may receive clarity through dreams, through prayer, through meditation, therapy, solitude, a quiet moment when everything suddenly makes sense. Um, I also do want to mention that Jupiter in the 12th house, Jupiter expands whatever it's in. And so, um, Jupiter does rule the ninth house, which is the manifestation of father energy, and the 12th house is the house of disease and disease. So some of you may also be navigating, a situation going on with father's help and the kind of tangential, um, psychological patterning that this brings up, right? How you're needing to really, kind of break down how you're feeling about a particular situation. Obviously, that's not going to be for all of you, but and you would know already going into this energy if something was going on with father energy. But this particular Kazemi, keep in mind, it's very private. It's not about public recognition. It's more about like this inner kind of liberation, right? It's a good thing. And by the end of the month, you are being asked to build this life that doesn't require you to erase yourself, right? I've been talking a lot about self-erasure the past couple of months, just in order to keep functioning. You're learning that, wellness isn't a luxury. It's not something that, oh, if only I had time to do that, right? And that if you allow yourself, an hour of peace, you're not being lazy. You're not being you're not. That's not a weakness. And your value has never depended on how much you can endure without asking for help. That's a narrative that you've established in your mind, that you've created based on external messaging, true, right? But it is a narrative that you created for yourself. So this second half of July begins a real powerful reset in your relationship with this idea of work and health and service and spiritual healing. And it's asking you to stop measuring your worth by your usefulness and just start creating daily systems that honor your body, your stress level, your humanity, honestly, like who you are, because that deeper transformation is very, very much available to you right now, Virgo. So I hope this was helpful in some way. Thank you so much for trusting me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hi, Libra Rising, to a lesser degree, Libra Sun and Moon. I hope you guys are doing great. Let's talk about the second half of July. As for you guys, amazing turning point around friendships and love and creativity and community and children and romance and just the future you're trying to build. But underneath all of those life areas, and I just listed a lot, there is this deeper story about belonging, and do you belong and do you fit in, which is different. Belonging is different, right? It's not about fitting in. It's not about being liked. It's not about keeping the peace and all of that, but belonging, right? And you're being asked to take a real hard look at where you've made yourself acceptable to other people and where you're now being called to be a lot more in alignment with yourself. Now, the 19th to the 22nd, this basket configuration, we have Jupiter at 4 degrees in Leo. We have IG at 1 degree in Leo. So it's that very first degree, very powerful. They're only a few degrees apart, so it's a strong conjunction. Through your 11th house, opposing Pluto retrograde at 4 degrees in Aquarius and Juno retrograde at 5 degrees, also in Aquarius in that fifth house. So what does this mean? Very powerful activation of your fifth and 11th house axis. So, fifth house, personal joy versus collective belonging, romance versus friendship, self expression versus community and like the masses, your heart versus the group. Um, Fifth house is very connected to your childhood. 11th house is your future. Fifth house is children as well. 11th house is future and where it is that you're going, right? So whenever we have an opposition, it's this little bit of tension that we need to work through. Now, Jupiter in your 11th house expands all of those 11th house things like friends and networks. Um, 11th house is also like an audience. If you have any sort of social media, your community, your long-term goals and gains. And this can open doors through friends or groups or collaborations or professional circles or people who you share your vision. Now, with Hygeia there, healing can come through community. So you may begin recognizing which people restore you, which friendships feel healthy, and which environments allow you just to breathe and be yourself, right? But Pluto and Juno retrograde across the wheel in your fifth house bring a deeper emotional kind of confrontation, right? So, because confrontation is always like what it is when we have this opposition. And so the fifth house is not only everything I mentioned, fun, dating, children, creativity, but it's the house of the living heart, right? And it shows where you feel free to express yourself without apology, right? So Pluto here is really asking where your joy has become just too complicated, you know? Where like anything that you do creatively, it's been tied to other things like approval or restriction, like where you just don't feel like you have the freedom in the moment to be as creative as you would like, or where the romance in your life has been identified through power struggles that are easy to identify in the group, or where children or family dynamics have activated very deep emotional patterns in yourself, and where you've stopped doing what you love because you're just too busy being what everybody else wants and needs you to do. Now, we can't be unrealistic. Obviously, if we have young kids and they need us, or if, we have a situation and need us, okay, but it's not about that. Jupiter retrograde here is really looking at this theme of commitment, right? So this can bring a lot of reflection around romantic bonds, creative contracts, our children, promises that we made to an older version of ourselves as well. So for some of you, this can involve a romantic relationship that needs honesty. Also, this is the house of the entrepreneur. It's getting very honest about, having your own business. Is it the right thing for you, right? So all of these things are going to be coming to mind. For others of you, it might involve some sort of creative dream that's just been buried under obligation. For others of you, it could bring this turning point involving children or parenting, or the emotional cost of always trying to be the balanced one, in the situation. Now, the Jupiter-Pluto opposition can feel like a tug of war between your future and your heart. It can. One part of you wants to expand socially, get out there, enjoy the world, connect with others, move towards bigger goals, and another part of you is facing something deeply personal. a desire, a wound, an attachment, or this creative truth that can no longer be pushed aside, or, the reality of having to take care of your children, or, what, take care of your business, whatever it is, right? Now, all of that being said, you guys know how to read the room. You're very good at that. This month is asking you to stop reading the room long enough to read yourself first, to really look at you. Because Jupiter and Hygeia and Leo, it's trining this Neptune retrograde in Aquarius in your seventh house. And this brings spiritual, romantic, and relational quality to the forefront for the month. So all the relationships that you're involved in. And Neptune in your seventh can often soften relationships or deepen compassion and open this door to a more soulful connection. But it could also reveal where you've maybe over idealized either the reality of something or how something should be. You may be realizing, because this can also reveal projection, where you've been projecting things onto someone else, or somebody's been projecting things onto you, or avoidance. All of these things together have somehow blurred your judgment, right? And you're going to be realizing all of this here. But you're going to have to be able to read yourself long enough to recognize those things. Now, the trine from Jupiter suggests that certain friendships and communities, or let's just future goals, may help you heal old relationship patterns. So, a supportive person may remind you what a healthy connection feels like, or a group can help you believe in your future again, or some sort of new vision for your life can begin forming through the people who truly see you. Now, at the same time, Pluto and Juno in Aquarius, sextiling Neptune in Aries, show that creative and romantic transformation is tied to relationship clarity. So you can begin understanding the difference between love that inspires you and love that dissolves your boundaries. So if you're someone who's always carrying the majority of the load, whatever it is, or at least that's what it feels like to you. That's your lived experience, and you're feeling it, and it's very real. You're really going to be looking at that because that's not something that's going to be able to continue. Now, on the July 23rd, Mercury stations direct in Cancer. And this is in your 10th house, while conjuncting Kronos at 16 degrees Cancer, also conjuncting Hades in Cancer and squaring Saturn in Aries in your 7th house. So this is like a major career and public life moment for you. Remember, not everybody's working, so it's not always only about work. 10th house is also the manifestation of mother energy, and it's also very connected to our long-term future. So Mercury direct in the 10th can bring forward some movement around work, something going on with mother energy, your future, your reputation, leadership, visibility, authority figures, some sort of long-term professional plans. Something that's felt delayed or unclear starts to make sense. So if you've been really kind of like lost, like where's my life going, or what's going on with my mother, or what's going on with my job, or whatever it is, there can be clarity here, something that's just felt very delayed or unclear. Okay. So this could mean a conversation with a boss or a client or your mother or an institution or a person in authority can happen, and then it makes the situation finally move forward. But because Mercury is conjunct Kronos and Hades, I want you to know going into this that the communication is not casual. And I know you guys don't like confrontation, but this is something that needs to be said, okay? Kronos does bring themes of leadership and authority and maturity. This idea of status and responsibility, very responsible. And Hades brings up what's been neglected, what's hidden, what you haven't wanted to look at, the uncomfortable thing, the ick in the corner under the blanket that you didn't even want to look at, right? And together, this can indicate a serious realization about a professional path, about your mother, about your public role, about your future, or just the general expectations that you've carried. So you can become super aware of a career issue that's been quietly weighing on you. Or you might recognize that a professional role looks good from the outside, but it feels emotionally draining on the inside. Or you might have to speak with maturity about something that's been avoided that's connected to either mother energy and or your future. Now, the square to Saturn and Aries in your seventh house adds pressure through relationships, contracts, clients, marriage, business partnerships, and there's one-on-one commitments that we have, right? So a relationship might influence some sort of career decision, or a relationship can influence how something is handled regarding your mother, or something having to do with your future, or a career issue can reveal something important about a relationship, right? It can happen that way too. Now, for a lot of you, this is especially significant because you typically try to make choices where everything stays copacetic, right? Where you're like, let's go along to get along and preserve the harmony, right? But Mercury direct is asking for clarity over people pleasing at this point. So your public life can't be built entirely around keeping everyone comfortable. Your future cannot be built around keeping everyone comfortable. You just can't do it, okay? The end of the month is not going to allow that. Now, moving on to the 26th and to the 27th, we have Saturn stationing retrograde, and about a half a day later, we have the node shifting. So, super deep review. This is happening, in your seventh house. So, very serious review of your closest relationships, your marriage, your clients, your business relationships, your doctors, again, these closest relationships. And Saturn in the seventh is asking for maturity, is like the key, capital M, okay? Honesty, boundaries, commitment. And when Saturn stations retrograde, relationship patterns become really, really difficult to ignore. So this can bring a lot of stuff up having to do with your marriage or dating or that business partnership or the situation with the client, or just the way that you in general, Libra, handle conflict and compromise. Okay. For the Libra rising, especially, to a lesser degree, Libra, Sun, and Moon, this is super duper deep work. Okay. Now, you naturally understand relationship because you guys are ruled. If, as a Libra rising, Venus rules your chart. So you understand relationships. You know how to listen. You know how to consider other people's perspectives. You do know how. You know how to create harmony. But Saturn is asking whether harmony has sometimes come at the expense of the truth and the reality of that situation. Over the coming months, you're going to be reviewing, you're not going to be able to not do it, where you've overcompromised, where you've avoided the hard conversations, or where you've taken responsibility for other people's stuff, and where you confuse peace with silence. Like, where do you make excuses? Or where do you just quietly carry the frustrations and aggravations instead of having the more pointed conversations? And then so Saturn goes retrograde. And then a few hours later, the lunar node shifts. So that north node goes into Aquarius in your fifth house of, again, children and entrepreneurial activities, your joy, taking a chance, falling in love, love affairs, romance. While the south node enters Leo in your 11th house, beginning a year and a half karmic cycle across that axis of creativity, love, joy, friendships, groups, and future goals. Okay, this is beautiful and a super important shift. Now, the South Node in Leo in your 11th house begins releasing old ego patterns connected to social belonging, old friendships, group identity. If you have any sort of social media, be audience or any kind of validation, but just needing approval from other people, right? That wider circle. This doesn't mean that you're ending friendships or you're leaving communities that you're involved with, but it doesn't mean that you're releasing those communities or those friendships, or even maybe even those goals that were built on performance, right? What it is that you do, right? What have you done for me lately kind of thing, rather than authenticity. And that North Node in Aquarius in your fifth calls you back to your own creative spark, right? Your growth now comes through self-expression and joy and your children and romance and art and just the courage to create something that reflects your truth, even if no one understands you. That's okay too, right? Because this is an 18-month lesson, right? And what is the lesson? It's no longer about outsourcing your sense of worth to other people. And this isn't about becoming an egomaniac and like making it all about you, you, you. It's not about that. It's about in a very authentic way connecting to what it is that makes you happy. You're learning that your heart has wisdom too, and not everyone else just like outside of you. Now, July 29th, we have the full moon in Aquarius and Jupiter Cazimi in Leo. So lots going on here at the end of the month. And that full moon in Aquarius brings, as full moons do, everything to a head. And the moon conjuncts Pluto and Juno retrograde in your fifth, opposing the sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in Leo in that 11th house. And this full moon can bring a powerful culmination around romance, children, creativity, fertility, some sort of passion project. I mean, this is very strong if you're thinking about like conceiving, or just even if you have this very strong desire to build something, right? So it could be literal, it could be metaphorical. Now, with Pluto involved, the emotional truth may feel super intense here. Something connected to love, to joy, or just creative expression is no longer easy to ignore. It's just not. So with Juno retrograde involved here, this can involve a commitment. So that could be a romantic commitment, a commitment to a child, a creative commitment, or a promise that you made to yourself about the kind of life that you actually wanted to live. And with this opposition to the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in the 11th, there's a highlight of this tension between your personal heart and the larger community that you're part of. So you can easily realize that like certain people, like friends or networks or groups that you're involved with, support your joy while others are draining it. Subtly, yes, but they're draining it. And you could easily see that a group goal just no longer reflects your personal truth. So you might be involved in certain groups of friends, which is not uncommon for Libra risings, where you have different groups of friends, but you may be realizing like that this group, they're just like so negative and so toxic and so blah, whatever it is, and you're going to choose to pull away, right? Um, it's not, and there's grace involved in this. There's grace involved in it, right? Because you want to feel alive, you want to feel connected, you want to feel pure, you want to feel like you can exhale and not worry about what anybody else thinks, right? Um, you're going to be more about responsibility and connection really moving forward. It's going to be a lot more. That's really going to be like the taglines for you, right? Now, the full moon can feel like a moment when your heart refuses to be negotiated with any longer. And then that when that Jupiter becomes Cazimi and Leo, again, sitting in the on the lap of the sun in your 11th house, this can illuminate the idea of community, friendship, network, audience, hopes, long-term dreams. And after all the intensity around love and creativity and belonging, this Jupiter Cazimi brings this breakthrough around your future, having to do with your future. So you can suddenly realize which people are part of your next chapter. Like I said in that last, I mentioned that last transit, and who maybe doesn't align with you quite as well anymore. So you can recognize that the right community will not require you to be a certain way. You could feel this renewed faith in a dream that's become just completely clouded by whether it's fear or rejection or comparison. Because a lot of you, a lot of it has to do with where Chiron has been sitting in Aries across from your positioning. A lot of you have been struggling with deep in the deepest core of yourself, feeling really good and confident about who you are, like really good and confident, you know. Um, And that Jupiter Cazimi wants to try to change that. By the end of July, you're being asked to build this future that includes both connection and joy. And you're just no longer meant to choose between like being accepted and loved by other people and being faithful to yourself. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be like one or the other. It's not, right? You're being reminded that true harmony is not created by abandoning your own desires and your own sense of self, right? It's created when your friendships and your communities and your goals and gains, right? What you want to do for your future, where all of these things have enough room for the real you to exist, like the real you. Okay. So I hope that was helpful in some way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys next time. Take care. Hi, Scorpio rising to a lesser degree, Scorpio sun and moon. You can listen to this if wherever your Scorpio is. But we have the second month of July is a turning point for you guys across your career, home, family, emotional foundation, your long-term plans, your public identity, right? It's not only about what you're building in the outside world, but it's about whether the life that you're building actually feels emotionally sustainable from the inside, right? So starting with the 19th to the 22nd, we have this basket configuration. So we have Jupiter at 4 degrees in Leo, Hygeia at 1 degree in Leo, moving through your 10th house. It's an angular house, so there's going to be action here. And it's opposing Pluto at 4 degrees in Aquarius and Juno retrograde. Both Pluto and Juno are retrograde in Aquarius. Juno is at 5 degrees, and that's happening in your fourth house. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Those are just for those of you who know astrology, right? I say for that, but what does it mean? So this for you guys, a very powerful activation of the fourth house, 10th house axis, which is your private life, fourth house, public life, 10th house, home, fourth house, career, 10th house, emotional security, fourth house, your long-term future, the 10th house, roots and reputation, emotional safety, external success as well. So Jupiter in your 10th can expand your visibility, your professional opportunities, your leadership, reputation for those of you who are still working. If you're not working, it's just your long-term direction. It's the long-term status of your marriage, your more serious relationship. It's also very connected to mother energy. So with Hygeia there may also be this healing connected to your future, your career path, your public identity, your relationship with success. So you can begin to see that ambition when it's aligned can be very healthy. So it can restore your confidence, it can give you the sense of purpose. But Pluto and Juno retrograde in your fourth house are pulling your attention towards something much deeper. So that fourth house is your emotional foundation, right? It's family, it's ancestry, it's home. It's childhood conditioning. It's your private life. It's that place inside of you that asks you for safety, right? And with Pluto there, old family patterns, emotional memories, these inherited fears, these unresolved private matters may come to the surface to be looked at and really looked at. Now, Juno retrograde adds the theme of commitments inside the home or family. So this can involve marriage, family agreements, caregiving roles, some sort of property situation, buying, selling, expanding, people moving in, moving out, living situations, anything like that, or unspoken emotional contracts that have shaped your life for many years. Now, for a lot of you, this opposition can feel like this tension between the life that you're trying to build publicly, like that you really want, and the emotional patterns that you're still carrying privately. Now, Jupiter in the 10th wants you to literally rise, right? The 10th house is the highest house in the chart, and Jupiter is about expansion, wants you to rise. Pluto in the fourth, though, opposing that, is insisting that you can't rise by abandoning the parts of yourself that still need healing. So, to put that in other words, you can't end up manifesting this ultimate life that you want or going after that thing that you want without first being brutally honest with yourself about the deepest parts of yourself and healing those things. And then being able to enjoy the open door to energy that Jupiter in the 10th house provides. But you have to understand these energies are, you can't lie to them. Do you know what I mean? They know, right? Keep in mind that the planets and the stars and everything in the sky, it's all God's workshop, right? These energies know us better than we know ourselves. So there's no trying to negotiate around it, right? So this healing needs to happen in that fourth house. And what are we talking about with fourth house healing? We're talking about healing our early childhood environment, healing past marriages, forgiving ourselves for not being the most ideal parents, but not just forgiving yourself in private, but sitting down maybe with your children and having the conversation. Um, and anything connected to the deepest recesses of that fourth house energy, right? Because once we do that and we heal and we just make peace with that, then we're able to really enjoy that Jupiter um, rise, right? In that 10th house. So that could have to do with your general future. It could be career growth, recognition, some sort of important professional opportunity, but it could also just reveal where home life or your family history or emotional responsibilities are demanding transformation. Now, the deeper psychological work is recognizing that success doesn't heal everything by itself. You can achieve so much in life and still feel very unsettled if your inner foundation hasn't been cared for, right? That inner child, that inner pain, that inner messaging is not connected to money, a house, or whatever, right? And that Jupiter and Hygeia and Leo also trining Neptune retrograde in Aries in your sixth house is bringing support through work, your health, routines, service, daily practices, all the sixth house things, right? Neptune in the sixth can soften your relationship with the idea of control and perfection. It can encourage a much more compassionate energy around that you have toward your body, right? If you haven't been treating your body great. And even if you've been trying, but maybe you've been drinking too much, maybe you're eating the wrong foods, maybe you haven't been exercising enough, maybe you haven't been controlling your depression or anxiety, in the way that you should be. Or maybe it has nothing to do with that. Maybe it's your workload and your need for spiritual or emotional rest just inside of your daily life, right? All of that's going to be encouraged. Now, at the same time, Pluto and Juno in Aquarius, sextiling Neptune in Aries, shows that changes are happening at home or within the family, and they're connected to changes connected to your health or connected to your daily work life or your daily routines. So, a family issue may affect your schedule, or a career shift may require some sort of new habit, or a private emotional realization can help you understand why certain health stress or health challenges have been repeating themselves, right? Where they keep coming back. And this basket configuration is asking you to stop separating your outer success and what it is that you really want in life from your inner conditioning. Your body, your home, your work, your ambitions are all speaking to each other now. They're all in conversation, okay? And now moving forward to the 23rd, Mercury is stationing direct in the sign of Cancer in your ninth house, while also conjuncting Kronos at 16 degrees Cancer, conjuncting Hades in Cancer, squaring Saturn in Aries in your sixth house. So this brings movement and clarity around your beliefs, around could be education, legal matters, travel, publishing, marketing, advertising, teaching, your faith, your politics, anything having to do with father energy, or just a larger direction of your life. Now, Mercury direct in your ninth house can also see the bigger picture after a period of confusion or delay. So a conversation, an application, some sort of educational course, educational in one way or another. It doesn't have to be like at a university, a legal issue, a travel plan, or some sort of important decision may begin moving forward. And you know what I mean when I say important decision. That would be changing your worldview, but also maybe expanding your life. Now, with Kronos involved, this may connect to institutions, authority figures, credentials, leadership, or some sort of serious long-term plans. And with Hades involved, something neglected or uncomfortable is likely going to come to light here to be looked at. So you can realize that, something really needs to be looked at in the way of like an old fear, um, old disappointment. I'm just looking here. There's some sort of old belief system that's been shaping your choices a lot more than you've even realized. So that square to Saturn and Aries in your sixth house, it adds pressure around work, around your health, around routines and responsibilities. So a larger dream or a larger thing that you want to do may require a more disciplined daily structure. A legal or educational matter may require some sort of practical follow through, or like some sort of spiritual realization or political realization may need to be supported by real changes in how you live day to day. So, for a lot of you, this can feel like a serious mental reset, right? Where you're realizing that your future can't be built on survival patterns. It has to be built on a truth that is strong enough to sustain your daily life. And there's a requirement of a lot of open and honest self reflection here. And then we have the 26th and the 27th, and I mean like overnight, Saturn stations retrograde a half a day later, the node shift. Okay. So Saturn is stationing retrograde in Aries in your sixth house, and this is going to start begin a review of work, your health, your day-to-day responsibilities, your discipline, routines, your health, anything connected to coworkers, your employees, just responsibilities that shape your everyday life. And Saturn retrograde here is asking you to be super honest about what is sustainable. So you're likely going to need to review your workload, your boundaries, any habits that you exercise around your health, your schedule, your day-to-day schedule, or the way that you've just been managing stress. This is not punishment, guys, it's correction. And there's a difference because Saturn in the sixth typically reveals where daily lives become too heavy or too reactive or too disconnected from your actual needs. So for you guys, this can also expose patterns of over control where life feels uncertain. You can easily try to manage every little detail, but your body often tells the truth before the mind is ready to admit it, right? So if your routines, your health, or your work life are showing strain, or you know that they need to be considered or managed or controlled in some way, Saturn retrograde is asking you to listen to that and lean into it. Then a few hours later, the lunar nodes shift. The north node moves into Aquarius in your fourth house, and the south node moves into Leo in your 10th house, beginning a year and a half karmic cycle across the home, future, career axis. So this is major. They're angular houses, which do require movement and action. So the South Node in Leo in your 10th begins releasing old ego patterns connected to career, recognition, status, achievement, authority, public identity. This doesn't mean that your career is becoming less important. It doesn't mean that at all. Or that the future that you've been aiming towards is any less important. It just means that you're no longer meant to define yourself only by what you do or how other people perceive you, right? Then North Node and Aquarius in your fourth is pulling you towards emotional liberation and just a healthier home life, family healing, more authentic internal foundation. Over the next 18 months, growth comes through creating a private life that gives you some room to breathe. This is an important lesson for you guys because power isn't only found in the public or how people perceive you or in your career or in how it is, or in your marriage, or that ideal that you had for your future. It's also just found in peace, right? Power is found in having a home and a family system, an emotional foundation that doesn't require you to constantly brace yourself. you know, you know what I mean, right? And so moving on to the 29th, we have the full moon in Aquarius, and we also have Jupiter reaching Cazimi in Leo, right? Opposing this. So on the 29th, that full moon in Aquarius, full moons always bring something to a head, right? Culminate something. And so it's working with Juno retrograde in your fourth house, and it's opposing the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia and Leo in your 10th house. So it's not just happening, right? In that sign of Aquarius. So this is bringing this culmination in the part of your chart. It's bringing it in is the area of home, family, real estate, your living situation, parents, ancestry, emotional security, as well as your private commitments. And with Pluto involved, the emotional truth can be pretty intense, but something that's been buried in your private life can become impossible to ignore. Like you can't ignore the thing anymore. You can't, okay? So with Juno retrograde involved, there can be a turning point around family obligations, marriage, or some sort of serious relationship, domestic agreements, or the promise that you've made inside of your closest personal world. You know, like that you would stay in that thing no matter what, or whatever it is, right? You may see where either a family or some sort of home dynamic has just become too controlling, too unequal, too overwhelming, too tied to an older version of yourself. And this could certainly be around your most important relationships. And this opposition to the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in your 10th house highlights the tension between what the world sees and what you're carrying privately. So there can be this moment here when you realize that this outward perception or the outward success or the outward whatever it is just not enough for the inner life to feel settled, right? This full moon exposes the gap between like image and truth. It just is. And you're going to know exactly what it is when it happens. But it can also help to close that gap. Because when Jupiter Cazimis reaches Cazimi in Leo and it's sitting right there with the sun in your 10th house, there's this powerful moment of illumination around your purpose and around career and leadership and your long-term goals and your reputation and how other people in your life view you, and just the general direction that your life is taken. And after all the emotional intensity of the fourth house, full moon, Jupiter Cazimi can bring this breakthrough having to do with your future, your public life, how people see you. So some of you can receive recognition, or some of you may just receive clarity or confidence, or just this deeper understanding of where and what you're meant to do next. But the deeper messaging here isn't simply, again, about professional success, just because it's the 10th house. It aligns, it is aligned success, meaning this coming together of what feels right for you for the future. Because Jupiter Cazimi reminds you that the work that you are here to do must be connected to the person that who you truly are. The future that you ultimately go after has to be aligned to the person that you truly are. This cannot simply be about doing anything in order to survive. More of it to survive the past. Okay. It's not about that. By the end of the month, you guys are going to be asked to redefine what it means to be successful from the inside out. You're no longer meant to build a public life that costs you your private peace. You're no longer able to stay in that thing that's connected to your long-term plans that is not authentic and fair. You're no longer meant to choose like this idea of chasing recognition while ignoring what your emotional foundation needs. You can't control the controlling situation with security. That's what the second half of July is asking you to look at, really heal the roots so that your branches can grow, right? It's really asking you to build a life where ambition and emotional safety exist together. And with this Jupiter Cazimi in your 10th, it's reminding you that your future, whether it's work or just your general future, can be powerful without requiring you to abandon yourself along the way. And those are the big messages here. So I hope that was helpful, Scorpio Rising. Thank you so much for hanging with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Sagittarius Rising. Let's take a look at the second half of July for you guys. This is a big change uh, transit. Focused on how you think, how you communicate, what you believe, how you teach, for those of you who are teachers, how you learn, and just making meaning out of your life. This isn't about changing your mind. This is about changing the whole framework through which you understand yourself and the world around you. And we've kind of been talking about this, I feel like, since especially last year, maybe even back before that, since Pluto went into Aquarius, right? Really changing up the way that you think, speak, and communicate. Now, from July 19th to the 22nd, we have this basket configuration. So for you guys, we have that Jupiter at 4 degrees in Leo, Hygeia at 1 degree in Leo, moving through your ninth house, opposing Pluto retrograde at 4 degrees, and Juno retrograde at 5 degrees in the third house, right? Which is a Mercury ruled house. It's where Gemini lives, but it's where Aquarius sits in your chart. So what does all that mean? This activates your third house, ninth house axis, which is about facts and meanings, daily conversations, and higher truth. Your local environment, like your neighborhood, your neighbors, versus foreign lands, foreign travel, foreign connections. Information, third house, wisdom is ninth house. What else is ninth house? Manifestation of father energy. It has to do with publishing, marketing, advertising, politics, law, legalities, governance, higher mindedness, higher education. I think I covered everything. But it's about expanding. It's very connected to your worldview, you know. So Jupiter in your ninth house is powerful because Jupiter is your ruling planet. That is your home, right? Ninth house is where Sagittarius naturally lives in the natural chart. So obviously this is going to be blowing up your worldview, your faith, your education, your spiritual life, and all of these things that I mentioned. But with Hygeia there, this expansion is also healing. So you may be recovering, faith in your future, or reconnecting with some larger purpose, or realizing that you need a life that gives you and your spirit more room. But Pluto and Juno retrograde in your third house are asking you to examine your mental patterns, your communication style. It's asking you to look at your sibling dynamics, your local environment, your neighbors, your extended family, your daily habits of thought. How do you talk to yourself, right? And the agreements that you've made through words, promises, or even in silence, right? And those would be the promises that you make to yourself. But all of these things are up for review. And Pluto in the third is intense because it transforms the mind, right? It exposes where your thinking has become shaped by fear or control or old conditioning or past experiences. And Juno retrograde brings in the commitments that you've made through communication, things you agreed to, stories that you repeated, roles that you accepted, and conversations even that you avoided. And in this opposition can feel like a battle between the larger truth that you're growing into and the mental patterns that still keep you tied to some old story. Because Jupiter in the ninth wants meaning, and Pluto in the third wants honesty, demands honesty, doesn't want it, demands it. So you can realize that certain beliefs and conversations or environments no longer support the person that you're becoming. You may also recognize that words have power, and that some words that you've spoken to yourself for years have become internal contracts, promises that you've made that maybe you haven't fully followed through on. That's a broken contract. You could be having these conversations with other individuals in your life. Now, Jupiter and Hygeia in Leo, trining Neptune retrograde in Aries in your fifth, brings inspiration through fifth house things: creativity, romance, children, joy, art of all kinds of self-expression. Neptune in the fifth can wake up imagination and spiritual creativity. It's also, what else is the fifth house? entrepreneurial efforts, right? Having your own business in one way or another. It can reconnect you with passion and beauty and play, and the part of you that still believes that life should feel meaningful and not just manageable. Now, at the same time, Pluto and Juno in Aquarius, sextiling Neptune in Aries, show that your mental transformation is connected to your creative and emotional awakening. So, a conversation may inspire a creative breakthrough. A shift in belief can reopen your heart in a new way, a different way. A new idea can help you remember what genuine happiness and joy feel like. Lovely energy too to connect with children in your life, whether it's your own children, grandchildren, or niece, nephew, whatever. Now, for you guys, this configuration is asking you to stop shrinking your vision to fit into old conversations and old environments or old expectations, even the ones that you've created for yourself, that like that your life has to be this way. Otherwise, I'm going to feel closed in, or otherwise I'm not going to feel like I could be myself, or whatever it is, recognizing like where those old narratives aren't working anymore. And your mind is changing because your life is trying to expand. It's trying to. Now, on the 23rd, we have Mercury going direct in Cancer, and this is happening in your eighth house while conjuncting Kronos, also conjuncting Hades in Cancer, squaring Saturn and Aries in your fifth house. So, very deep, emotionally serious transit. Okay, it just says. Now, Mercury direct in your eighth brings clarity around shared finances and intimacy and debt, and for some of you, taxes, inheritance, grief, trust. What else is in there? Therapy, secrets, vulnerability, and emotional entanglements. Something that has been confusing or really difficult to discuss may begin moving forward. Now, with Kronos involved, this may connect to authority or maturity or institutions or financial structures or serious commitments. With Hades involved, something buried or uncomfortable has to come to the surface to be looked at. So this can be a conversation about money, a truth within a relationship, an old wound within a relationship, either yours or somebody else's, or a private fear that just can't be ignored anymore. Now, the square to Saturn in Aries in your fifth house adds pressure around romance and children, creative expression, or personal happiness. A financial or emotional issue may affect something very, very close to your heart. So, a conversation about intimacy can reveal where your joy's been blocked. A creative dream may require some practical responsibility. So for many of you, this transit is asking for emotional honesty. You're naturally you are a future-oriented sign, but the eighth house reminds you that real freedom sometimes requires looking directly at what's unresolved. Now, moving forward to the 26th to the 27th, Saturn turns stations retrograde, the nodes shift. Okay. So Saturn first stations retrograde in Aries in your fifth house, and about a half a day later, the node shifts. So it's essentially happening overnight from the 26th into the 27th. So this begins a review, really, of that fifth house energy. You know, creative project, romance, pleasure, children, fertility, confidence, and just the way that you express yourself, express your heart, express your joy. Now, Saturn retrograde here is asking you to become more intentional about joy. And I know that sounds really weird, right? But joy requires structure too. Creative projects need discipline. Relationships need maturity. Children require responsibility and structure and boundaries, which is Saturn is all about that. Pleasure becomes more meaningful when it's not used to avoiding the deeper truths of a situation, right? Now, this transit helps you see where fear has gotten in your way, where it's really limited self-expression, where it's limited your ability to feel happy and connected and joyful in relationship or with your children or with a creative project. It can also reveal where you've become overly serious and guarded and just afraid to take creative risks. And then the lunar nodes change, right? And that north node is in Aquarius, going into Aquarius in your third, and the south node in Leo in your ninth house. And this is beginning an 18-month cycle. So it's for a year and a half, this karmic cycle across your communication and your belief axis. And the south node in Leo in your ninth begins releasing these outgrown ego patterns around certainty and righteousness and identity-based beliefs, or the need to be seen as the one with the answer. Now, this doesn't mean that your wisdom disappears, and it doesn't, right? Or that nobody cares what you have to say anymore. It just means that your wisdom becomes more flexible and a lot more humble and more connected to real life, right? And that you're listening to people more. That North Node in Aquarius in your third calls you towards curiosity and dialogue and listening, right? Opening your mind. Its third house is about writing and learning and teaching and exchanging ideas in new ways. So over the next 18 months, your growth comes through communication that's more open and more experimental and more future oriented, right? You're learning that truth isn't weakened by conversation, right? It's refined by it, right? And then moving forward, we have the full moon in Aquarius and we have Jupiter entering a Cazimi position in Leo. But first on the 29th, we have the full moon in Aquarius, brings everything to a peak, everything to a culmination like full moons typically do. And that moon is conjuncting Pluto and Juno retrograde in your third house, opposing the sun, Jupiter, and Hygieia and Leo in your ninth house. So it's not just the full moon. But the full moon can bring this powerful realization, conversation, message, decision, sibling situation, some sort of neighborhood issue or writing project, a contract, or just some sort of communication breakthrough. With Pluto involved, the truth can be pretty intense. And with Pluto retrograde involved, the focus can involve a promise made or an agreement or relationship pattern or even some sort of mental contract that needs to be revisited. Okay, let cooler heads prevail with that one, right? Important conversation doesn't have to be heated, but it seems like there needs to be some sort of addressing of the situation. Now, sitting in opposition to this energy is the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygieia in the ninth house, which is highlighting the tension between what you believe and what your daily life is showing you. So something may force you to speak more honestly, more openly, think differently, and just release this old story. And this could be very connected to a sibling relationship, really any relationship. When I'm saying that, because the third house is siblings and extended family. And then Jupiter becomes Cazimi in Leo. It's sitting right at the heart of the sun. They are conjuncting in that ninth house. And this is a beautiful moment of illumination for you because Jupiter is your ruling planet. And this Cazimi can feel especially meaningful for you. It can bring some sort of like renewed faith or spiritual insight or clarity around travel or education or some kind of breakthrough in teaching or publishing or deeper understanding of your life's direction. But the deeper gift here is perspective, because after weeks of mental intensity and emotional conversation and belief system shifts, Jupiter Cazimi reminds you that your future is larger than your fear. In other words, your fears and any sort of vulnerabilities or just stuff that you're allowing to get in your way is what would keep your life smaller than what your life really wants to be right now. So by the end of the month, you're being asked to let your mind evolve so that you can expand. You're not meant to live any longer according to those old stories, those old conversations that you've been telling yourself about how things need to be, those old definitions of truth. The second half of July opens this doorway into this broader and freer and just more honest version of your life. So your wisdom comes not from having all the answers. It's not from having all the answers, but from the willingness to grow beyond all of the ideas and that you once held, all of the ways that you've been telling yourself that life needs to be. Okay, my friend. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Hi, Capricorn Rising. I hope you guys are doing great. Let's talk about the second half of July. Brings a powerful turning point around money, around intimacy, around trust, shared resources, self-worth, and just these deeper emotional contracts that shape your closest relationships. And this is it's not simply about finances, it's about a lot more than that. It's about power, where you hold it, where you give it away, where you are just learning to build security from a more honest place within yourself. Now, when we get to July, like 19th to the 22nd, where we have the basket configuration, we're dealing with Jupiter at 4 degrees, Hygeia at 1 degree in Leo, and they're moving through your eighth house, and it's opposing Pluto at 4 degrees in Aquarius retrograde and Juno retrograde at 5 degrees in Aquarius in your second house. And so obviously this is activating the axis, second house, eighth house axis, which is your personal money, shared money, self-worth, intimacy, independence, vulnerability, control, trust, second house being the bottom thing, eighth house being the top thing. And so there's going to be this tension here. So Jupiter in the eighth house expands themes around shared finances and debts and taxes and inheritance and investments, intimacy, grief, therapy, emotional merging, any sort of psychological healing. And with Hygeia there, this could be a deeply cleansing transit, right? Because it can bring healing through honesty, through financial restructuring, through deeper intimacy, or through financially facing something that's been quietly weighing on you, you know? But Pluto and Juno retrograde in your second house bring an equally powerful energy to your own money, right? That's like in your bank account or your values and what matters to you, your possessions, your stability, your sense of self-worth. Pluto here is transforming your relationship with security and all the way down the list, whether it's money, your sense of self, whatever it is. But what he does is he exposes our fears, right? He's exposing where fears have shaped your financial decisions and where scarcity has become part of your identity and where your sense of value has been tied too closely to what you can control. And that's a big pill to swallow, but that's something that's really going to become very clear to you. You might even be feeling it already, but it's going to become a lot more clear as the month progresses. Now, Juno retrograde adds this theme of commitments around money and worth. So you can be reviewing financial agreements or relationship contracts or business arrangements or old promises you made to yourself about what you would never need from anyone else. And for a lot of you, this opposition can feel deeply personal because you're often the one who wants to remain the one, right? The one who's capable and composed and self-sufficient, right? You may be comfortable with being that way, that the responsible one, but less comfortable needing help. And I do want to say that if this is particularly relevant, it's different if you have a lot of retrograde energies, right? But typically that is that Capricorn rising energy, and you may trust yourself more than you trust other people. That's straight up the truth, right? I mean, I'm Capricorn rising. I could say that even in my own life. Doesn't mean I don't have wonderful people in my life. It's my own thing. And in many cases, life has taught us to be that way. It's just the way it is. But Jupiter in the eighth house is asking us to understand that vulnerability is not weakness and that receiving support doesn't make us powerless. It just doesn't. Trusting somebody doesn't have to mean that we lose ourselves or we lose our ability to be ourselves and do what it is that we want. And allowing transformation doesn't mean that we fail to have agency over our own life, right? This opposition can bring up some financial realities, having to do with debt or taxes or other people's money. If it might not be anything about money, it might be the reality of relationship power dynamics or emotional truths that need to be addressed. But beneath the practical details, the deeper work is about reclaiming your power without hardening your heart. A lot of you could be looking at sex and intimacy very differently. And maybe not wanting to face some of the uncomfortable truths in that way, right? In that part of your life. Now, Jupiter and Hygeia in Leo also trine Neptune retrograde in Aries in your fourth house. So this brings a spiritual and emotional layer through home, family, fourth house things, ancestry, roots, and your private emotional foundation. So healing in the eighth house is supported by compassion in the fourth house. Okay. Healing in the eighth is supported by compassion in the fourth. So old family patterns around money, survival, trust, control, emotional safety may become easier to understand if you're understanding the situation of your early environment or of a past marriage or a past living situation, right? There is this connection to what's going on in your eighth house from your fourth house, but in a supportive way. Now, at the same time, Pluto and Juno in Aquarius, sextile Neptune in Aries, showing that changes in your self-worth and financial life are connected to deeper healing around home and family stuff, home and family conditioning, home and family ideologies and beliefs. So a money issue may not only be about money, it may reveal some sort of inherited belief about safety. A relationship issue may not only be about the present, it might be echoing something much older, something from the past. So this basket configuration is asking you to stop treating security as something that comes only from control. And real security also comes from emotional honesty and healthy support, and knowing that you can survive change without abandoning yourself, without erasing yourself, right? I've been talking a lot about this idea of self-erasure and how we all have to be very mindful of it. Now, on the 23rd, Mercury goes direct in the sign of Cancer in your seventh house, but it's also conjuncting Kronos and Hades at the same time, and it's squaring Saturn and Aries in your fourth house. So this connection of energies is going to bring some clarity and movement around relationships, marriage, partnerships, clients, contracts, sort of one-on-one dynamics. So a conversation that's been delayed may finally move forward, or a relationship issue can finally become clear. A commitment may need to be discussed with greater maturity at this point, where cooler heads prevail. Everybody put their ego on a shelf and just sit and have this open conversation. Now, with Kronos involved there may be themes around this idea of either authority, responsibility, leadership with long-term commitment, right? And with that Hades involved, something neglected, painful, or buried, or just something negative within the relationship comes to the surface, right? And I feel like Hades is always like kind of there. He just needs a transit to just like bring it to the surface, right? So this can be a conversation that's way overdue about something that was painful. You might be having the conversation again, but through a different lens, right? A truth that's been avoided needs to be looked at, or some sort of pattern. It just can't stay hidden anymore. It's got to come to the surface, right? And with that square to Saturn and Aries in your fourth house, this ends up adding some pressure through home, family, sort of living situation, emotional foundation, or private responsibility. So a relationship conversation can be connected directly to family dynamics or some sort of domestic realities, right, that are going on, how you guys live, where you live, who does what, all of that stuff. Now, a partnership may require more honesty around emotional needs, around boundaries, or the way that responsibilities are being carried out at home. Not only fairness, but are they there in the first place? I'm really looking at like what might be missing and just trying to have an open and honest conversation. Now, for a lot of you, I do want to just say it's a serious relationship astrological month. Did I say that right? Right? Very strong relationship energy this month, right? It's asking for directness, but it's also asking for emotional sensitivity. So choose your words, right? But you're being asked to speak the truth, Capricorn, without shutting down, and you need to be able to listen without taking on everything as another responsibility to manage. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it's almost like the fissure is growing. The crack already started in the idea that you guys do everything, right? So the fissure was there, but now the crack, the fissure is kind of expanding a little bit this month. And there needs to be some kind of communication about, all that you're doing. you're holding a lot together. Now, moving on to the 26th and to the 27th, we have Saturn stationing retrograde, and then we have the nodes shifting about a half day later. So I'm saying like the 26th and to the 27th, Saturn stations retrograde in Aries in your fourth house. So this is beginning a review of fourth house stuff like home, family, parents, property, emotional security, private structures of your life. Do you feel emotionally safe and secure in your life? What's going on in the home front? Children, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Fourth house things. Now, the thing is, Saturn retrograde in the fourth house can feel heavy. Saturn doesn't love being in the fourth house. It just doesn't. It's the deepest house in your chart. It's an angular house, but it's completely necessary. It's asking you to examine where the foundation beneath your life is strong enough to hold what it is that you're building. So this may involve family responsibilities, a move, some sort of property matter situation, something going on with property, caregiving, the idea of boundaries with relatives, or the need to create a home life that feels more stable and less reactive. But that's how what Saturn is really going to be establishing there. Now, at the same time, don't be surprised because fourth house is so connected to your early environment that you're doing a lot of thinking and a lot of healing connected to your early environment, right? So you'll be actually having some wonderful memories from your childhood rise to the surface, which are wonderful and warm and warming, right? Nostalgic, but kind of healing in a certain way. But then other things might be coming up where you're realizing some lessons from the past that maybe you haven't realized up to this point, right? Because psychologically, this is the inner foundation, right? And so you guys often become very strong very early. This is like the typical Capricorn rising became strong very early in life, where we may have learned to handle things or to stay composed or to be reliable or to just push through, right? But Saturn in the fourth asks you to look at the emotional cost of always being the strong one. And I do have to say, this is one of the strongest transits that you've had. You may not have even realized that, but where all of these things may be coming back to you, where you're realizing, like, wow, why was I dealing with it at that situation at that age? What was the lesson there? You know, why was I doing that at that age? Like realizing the old soul that you are, right? Of course, because Saturn rules your chart. I was laughing with my husband a couple of weeks ago. We were and I haven't thought about this in so many years, but when I was a young teenager, a very inexperienced teenager, in my neighborhood, everyone always knew I was a big reader and I loved to write. I was always writing my poems, my stories, whatever. And everybody around the neighborhood knew that. And one day, this girl wanted to break up with her boyfriend. And she must have been 5 years older than me. Maybe I was 12, 13, something like that. She was like 5 years older than me. And she didn't know how to tell him. I'm sitting there, and at that point, I was already like playing with my tarot cards and I was starting, I'm ready to dangle with astrology. So I come like with all my wisdom and I tell her like what to say. What the hell did I know about relationships? And she was like, oh, could you write that down? So I write literally a breakup letter for her boyfriend. And she came back to me and she was like, oh, thank you so much. It really worked. You should totally do this. So word of mouth, people were asking me to write them breakup letters, love letters, birthday messages for their, and they were paying me. I wasn't even asking, but they were like, here's $3, here's $5. And I was like, okay, but I did that for about a year, right? And I don't know why. I didn't give it a lot of weight then, and I didn't for years. And a few weeks ago, I was like, I'm talking to my husband. I'm like, how freaking weird was that? That I was that age and I'm writing like these deep, introspective kind of, letters to these people who I essentially didn't even know. They would give me like the highlights of stuff and I would like kind of write things out. And it was just like, why was I doing that at that? I didn't have the life experience behind me, but yet I knew, right? And so, and I'm sure a lot of you watching this right now have your own version of that story. Please share it in the comments below. Because I'm sure you were probably like running something, or maybe you were running your family or something like that. You know what I mean? Or you were like the strong one in the family out of your siblings. Because I always kind of was in that way, like the strongest minded, even though I was the youngest, right? And I sometimes wish it wasn't like that, right? Because it caused other issues for me. But that is the way it is. So these things are going to be coming up, not just to come up to remind you, but to really look at, what was the lesson behind that? Was it a lesson in strength that maybe you need to be reminded of right now? Whatever it is, right? But psychologically, you're being asked to look at the emotional cost of always being the strong one. And then the lunar nodes are going to shift, and the north node moves into Aquarius in your second house, and the south node moves into Leo in your eighth house. And this starts a year and a half cycle across the axis of money, worth, intimacy, shared resource axis, right? Everything that we mentioned. So definitely a major shift for you with the South Node in your eighth. It just begins releasing old ego patterns around control and crisis and emotional intensity and financial entanglement and dependency and the need to prove loyalty through sacrifice. It could show you where you've become just too attached to complicated emotional and or financial dynamics. And it's like, simplify. Truly, your soul's going to be really calling for you to simplify. Now, the North Node in Aquarius in your second pulls you towards greater self-sufficiency and financial clarity and these personal values, while having a more liberated sense of your own worth. And so over the next year and a half, you're learning to build that security that's not totally dependent on another person's situation, whether it's their choices or whatever it is that they're doing, their approval, their emotional availability, whatever it is. It doesn't mean that you're rejecting intimacy. It means that entering intimacy from a place of wholeness rather than survival is where you need to be at. Now, moving on to July 29th, we have the full moon in Aquarius and Jupiter Cazimi in Leo. So on that 29th, the whole story comes to a peak, right? With that Aquarius Leo energy, right? As full moons do, they always bring everything to a culmination. But it's also it's working with other energies. The moon is conjuncting Pluto retrograde, Juno retrograde in your second house, opposing the sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in Leo in the eighth house. So it's not just the full moon acting on its own. So this can bring this culmination around income, expenses, self-worth, possessions, debt, shared money, intimacy, trust, or some sort of financial agreement. And with Pluto involved, the truth can feel pretty intense. It could also be very clarifying, though. So with Juno retrograde involved, a commitment around money or values or emotional investment can be revisited. Now, the opposition to the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in the eighth shows that your personal security and your shared commitments are both demanding attention right now. So you're probably going to have to like negotiate or renegotiate some sort of terms. It could be of like a loan or like a mortgage or a tax thing or shared money, or face a financial reality or set a boundary, or just acknowledge where a relationship dynamic has affected your sense of self-worth. Because that full moon reveals what's no longer sustainable. And we also reveal how much power you regain when you stop outsourcing your security to unstable situations. And then Jupiter becomes Cazimi in Leo, which is sitting right next to the sun. It's conjuncting the sun in your eighth house. So a very profound moment of illumination around intimacy, trust, shared resources, and emotional transformation. So after all the pressure around money and self-worth and control and vulnerability, Jupiter Cazimi can bring a breakthrough. You may understand a financial situation a lot more clearly. You can feel ready to heal that old wound, or you might recognize that intimacy doesn't require self-abandonment and that being independent doesn't require you to be emotionally isolated. Jupiter Cassimi in the eighth reminds you that transformation is not the same thing as loss. And sometimes that transformation is the exact moment that you realize that you're no longer willing to survive on those old terms anymore. So by the end of the month, you guys are being asked to rebuild your sense of security kind of from the inside out, right? Because you're learning that worth isn't measured by what it is that you carry alone, and it's not, you know, assessed by how well you control everything, right? And love isn't proven through sacrifice or crisis or some sort of emotional debt, right? It's, I just feel like you guys are being helped to reclaim your value and renegotiate your commitments and heal the places where survival mentality taught you to kind of confuse control with safety. So it's deep work, but it's very freeing once you remember that your worth belongs to you and not any relationship or not any financial situation or life transition, right? It's not about that, right? Um, it's about you and your worth, right? And that is what I have for you guys for this end of the month. I hope this was helpful for you. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I will see you guys next time. Take care, Capricorn. Hi, Aquarius Rising, to a lesser degree, Sun and Moon. The second half of July is a very personal and powerful period of the year for you, obviously, because you're a part of the nodes going on here. You're going to be opposing that Jupiter energy. So these transits activate your first and seventh houses, which means the central story for you guys is about identity, relationships, commitment, power, healing, and the way that you're learning to be fully yourself while still being in connection with other people. So let's talk about this basket configuration, particularly the window from the 19th to the 22nd. Jupiter at 4 degrees, Hygeia at 1 degree, both in Leo, moving through your seventh house, opposing Pluto and Juno retrograde. Pluto at 4 degrees, Juno at 5 degrees in your first house. So intense because Pluto and Juno are in your sign. So you are the one who's being transformed, right? We've been talking about this for a while. But all of these types of transits that we talk about and with the nodes moving in, it's sort of like this layering effect, right? Now, with Pluto in your first, you're changing your identity from the inside out, right? This strips away old versions of yourself that were built around survival and protection and detachment and independence, or just needing to, in one way or another, stay emotionally untouchable. This is not superficial change. This is deep psychological restructuring that's going on with you. And with Juno retrograde also in there, you're reviewing the commitments that you've made to yourself, the roles that you've played, the promises that you've kept long after they've stopped feeling true for you, right? The identity contracts that you lived by, even when they limited your growth. So across from this, we have Jupiter and Hygeia and Leo moving through your second house of marriage, partnerships, clients, one-on-one relationships. It's your boss, it's your bosses. Now, Jupiter here can expand those relationships. It can bring important people into your life or help an existing partnership grow. And with Hygeia involved there, relationships can also become a part of your healing. So, like a partner for some of you, or a client, or a close friend, or a collaborator can help you see something about yourself more clearly. But the opposition to Pluto is powerful. So as you change, your relationships have to change too. Some people may celebrate your growth. Other people may resist it because they were more comfortable with the other version, the older version of you, right? And this opposition is where relationships are based on truth and where they're based on like roles, you know what I mean by like the role that you play in that relationship. Now, this can also expose power dynamics and control or even projection, emotional distance that you might be feeling with somebody, unspoken agreements, right? The place where one person has been carrying more weight than the other, and the places where loves become mixed with obligation or fear or dependence. Okay. So for a lot of you, this is especially profound because you often know how to maintain perspective. You guys are really good with that, right? You know how to step back and observe and analyze. You create distance when emotions become too intense. You know how to like take that emotion and put it in the closest cabinet and shut it tight until one random like Tuesday the next year, that cabinet will open up and all of those emotions will come flooding out. But I digress. But Pluto in your first house doesn't allow you here to stay outside your own transformation. You're going to want to, but Pluto's not going to let you. It brings you directly into the center of it. And with Jupiter and Hygeia and Leo also trining Neptune retrograde in Aries in your third house, this is bringing a much softer, more inspired energy through communication, writing for some of you, teaching, learning, siblings, neighbors, daily conversation. So words may become healing now. A conversation may open your heart. Writing can help you to kind of process what you haven't been able to say before. Your intuition may come through in these small little moments or in these messages or in these dreams or even just in these repeated thoughts. Now, at the same time, Pluto and Juno and Aquarius is sextiling Neptune and Aries, showing that your personal transformation is deeply connected to how you speak, think, and tell your story. So you may begin using like different language for your life. You might stop explaining yourself in those old ways. Stop saying you're sorry for this or that. Stop feeling so hesitant to say something in the first place. You may finally say something honest that changes the emotional tone of a relationship. Now, this basket configuration asks you to stop living as the version of yourself that was easiest for other people to deal with, right? You're becoming more honest and more embodied and more willing to be known. And that's just the reality of Aquarius Rising, period, full stop. And not everybody in your life may be comfortable with that. Now, moving on to July 23rd, Mercury stations direct in Cancer. Okay, 1 second. Sorry, I needed to attend to something real quick. Okay, but let's talk about this 23rd Mercury stationing retrograde in Cancer, while conjuncting again Kronos, Hades, squaring Saturn and Aries, all in your third house. So this is going to bring a lot of clarity around work and health and routines and responsibilities and coworkers and what else? Employees, clients, habits, and just the way that you structure your day-to-day life. And Mercury going direct in that sixth house can solve some sort of work issue that you might have been having, or it could bring clarity around some sort of health matter, or organize your schedule, or you finally understand what needs to change in your daily routine. But because Mercury is conjunct Kronos in Hades, this is more serious than simply getting organized. Kronos brings authority. He brings maturity and responsibilities and systems, right? He's very kind of like, he's Saturn's dad, right? So it's that Kronos energy. And Hades brings what's been hidden and neglected and kind of thrown under the rug over there, right? Or he could also bring something that's just been like wearing down over time, right? So together, this can point to like a workplace issue or a health pattern or responsibility that just can't be ignored anymore. And with the square to Saturn and Aries in your third house, this can add pressure through communication or paperwork or decisions or siblings or local matters or teaching, writing, or some sort of mental discipline. Some kind of conversation can feel super serious around this time period. So a decision that you're making is going to require some kind of maturity. So you may need to speak very clearly about boundaries and responsibilities and ask all the questions and what is the schedule and what is the need? If it's connected to your health, what is your health need? If it's connected to your daily work environment, what's the schedule? What's the compensation? Asking the questions. Now, for a lot of you, this transit reminds you that transformation isn't only emotional or spiritual, it's very practical. It lives in your calendar, in your body, in your workday, in your habits, in the way that you just stop letting yourself allow life to drain you. And this is going to be really, really obvious for you, right? Right towards the end of that month. And then on the 26th until the 27th, we have Saturn stationing retrograde in Aries and the node shifting. So this is happening just within hours of each other. So Saturn is going to station retrograde in Aries in your third house. And that's going to begin a review because it's retrograde of third house things, communication, thinking, learning, writing, siblings, neighbors, short trips, paperwork, and just these everyday decisions. Saturn retrograde here asks you to become more intentional with your words and your mental energy. So it could show where your minds become very racy, overloaded, where conversations have become just like too heavy, or where certain patterns of thinking need discipline and restructuring. So for a lot of you, this could be about learning how to communicate emotional truth without intellectualizing it. So you might be excellent at explaining what happened, right? But Saturn is asking you to acknowledge what it meant to you. And those are two different things, right? And then the nodes shift, right? The north node in Aquarius goes into your first house, obviously, and the south node into Leo in your seventh, beginning a year and a half karmic cycle across your identity and relationship axis. And obviously, this is very big for you. It's very big for your Leo counterparts, right? With that north node in your first house, you're being pulled towards self-sovereignty and authenticity and personal courage and just a stronger sense of your own path. So over the next year and a half, your growth is going to come through becoming more fully yourself, even when that disrupts old relational patterns. Now, the South Node in Leo in your seventh house begins releasing old ego patterns connected to relationships and approval and validation and romantic projections, or just needing another person to reflect your worth back to you. I'm not going to need it anymore. That doesn't mean a relationship disappears. It means that relationships just no longer have to be that heavy mirror. It doesn't have to be where you lose yourself, right? Because this cycle is teaching you that love's healthier when it doesn't require self-abandonment, because you're not meant to disappear into somebody else's expectations. You're just not. You're meant to make life smaller so a relationship can remain comfortable. That thinking has to finally be out the window. You can't, and I want to be very clear here. Like, I'm not only talking about romantic relationships, I'm even talking about your family relationships. I'm talking about your friendships, keeping it all small and contained to make everybody else comfortable, right? Can't be about that anymore, right? Because you're being called back to yourself, but back to a version of yourself that I wonder if some of you have ever even met, because this is a very liberating energy. It's a very liberating energy, right? Because Pluto is all about that, you know? Plus that Uranus and Gemini energy, it's all about you being liberated in these important areas. Now, on July 29th, we have the full moon in your energy, and we have Jupiter Cazimi in Leo. And so on the 29th, the full moon in your sign brings everything to a peak. The moon conjuncts Pluto and Juno retrograde in your first house. It's opposing the sun and Jupiter and Hygeia in Leo in your seventh. So major emotional culmination for you personally. The moon in your first house, these full moons always bring things into our awareness, but what does it bring into awareness here? Your own needs, your feelings, your body, your instincts, your identity into full awareness, right? And with Pluto being involved, the truth can feel pretty intense. So something inside you that's been suppressed or minimized becomes really difficult to ignore, impossible to ignore at this point. And with Juno retrograde involved, this can connect to a commitment, some sort of relationship pattern, or a promise you made about who you were supposed to be. Now, the opposition to the Sun, Jupiter, and Hygeia in your seventh house highlights the tension between your personal transformation and your closest relationships. A relationship can reach a turning point. A partnership dynamic can become very clear. We might even see who supports your healing and who only supports the version of you that stays familiar for them and their comfort, right? As that full moon brings this powerful relationship realizations to the forefront. But ultimately, it really is about self-recognition, right? You're not going to be able to not see where you have maybe become lost, right? In the muck and stuff of it all. Now that Jupiter becomes Cazimi in Leo, sitting in the heart of the sun in your seventh house, which brings illumination through a relationship. So a partner, a client, a collaborator, or a close connection can help you see the bigger picture. So a conversation can bring healing, a relationship can open up a new level of honesty, or you might even realize with surprising clarity what kind of partnership your future actually needs, right? Your future self actually needs. With that Jupiter Cazimi in the seventh, this can bring a blessing through another person as well. But it also reveals something essential about you and that you're no longer available for relationships that require you to abandon your own becoming. By the end of the month, you're being asked to just stand more firmly in your own identity while allowing relationships to evolve accordingly. That second half of the month isn't about choosing independence over love. It's about just choosing relationships that can meet the truth of who you actually are, right? It's about releasing those old patterns and reclaiming self-sovereignty and allowing your closest connections just to become more honest and more mutual and more alive, right? You're not becoming harder to love. Whoever thinks that, they're not on Team Aquarius. You're just becoming a little harder to control. And that's part of your healing. And I remember when I had Pluto transiting my first house, going through the same exact thing. Um, it was like non-negotiable that I had to choose certain things, you know. And so expect that you guys are going to be going through it. It's a very liberating kind of energy. So that is what I have for the second half of July for you guys. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye. Hi, Pisces rising, to a lesser degree, Pisces sun or moon. I say watch it if you have Pisces in any of those placements. But when we're talking about the last 2 weeks of July for you guys, there's a lot going on in your sixth house, 12th house axis. So there's this turning point around work, which is the sixth house, your daily work environment. It's also the house of health. Um, 12th house is the house of rest, spirituality, hidden patterns, things that you do without even realizing it. And also just the way that your body and soul respond when life has just asked too much of you for too long. So some of you might just start feeling this different kind of tiredness, this different kind of need to reset, I guess is the best way to put it. And this is not just simply about like you saying, oh, I got to get more organized. I have to take better care of myself. It's not about that. It's more about recognizing where your daily life no longer supports your inner life. So really looking at your daily work environment, your daily responsibilities, just going, 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 and really looking at all of that. Now, when we get to the time period of July 19th to the 22nd, we have Jupiter 4 degrees in Leo. We have Hygeia out 1 degree in that Leo energy, moving through that sixth house, opposing Pluto and Juno retrograde in Aquarius. Pluto at 4 degrees, Juno at 5 degrees in your 12th house. So this activates, again, that axis, 6 and 12, of work and rest and health and spirit and routine and surrender. It's that 12th house, sixth house service, 12th house self-abandonment, right? So we have Jupiter and Hygeia in that sixth house, which brings growth and healing through your daily life. So this can involve, for many of you, a work opportunity. Others of you, an improvement in your health or better routines that support you day to day. You might be developing some sort of new habits that are good for you, or a stronger desire to, at least a stronger desire to create order where your life has been feeling very overwhelming. Now, Hygeia makes this especially connected to wellness, right? Because Hygeia is the asteroid of wellness. When you look at her glyph, she looks like the medical symbol, like quite literally. So your body may be asking for more attention or more consistency, or maybe even more respect. Really looking at, are you moving enough? Are you exercising enough? What is your diet like? What kind of things are you ingesting? Are you taking care of your mental health? All of these different things, those are all very connected to Hygeia, and it's opposing the sixth house of disease and dis-ease and the subconscious. So really looking at how well you take care of yourself internally as well as externally. But that Pluto and Juno retrograde in that 12th house, They are all working at a much deeper level in the 12th, right? Because the 12th house holds the, and you guys know this better than anyone because it's where you live. It holds the unconscious, it holds the hidden, the spiritual, the private, the unresolved, and the patterns that a lot of times we carry these patterns, we don't even realize it, right? We don't. Now Pluto here is exposing what's been buried, right? And he's been doing his thing in there for about a year and a half now, and he's going to be doing it for another 18 years. Okay, so he wants to expose, he wants to bring up everything that's been buried, which is, to me, I'm like, that is so good, Pisces, and my progress chart, I'm a Pisces rising, so I really resonate with this. And like everything from the past that's been unresolved, like every little nook and cranny, every little flipping hangnail or crooked eye that somebody looked at us with, it could be coming up into our conscious mind because Pluto's pulling it up for us to look at it. And not to hurt us, but to just say, what do you want to do with this now? Do you want to can we let go of it now? It happened so long ago. Like, why are you still holding on to this? Is this part of your self-definition? We have to get rid of it now, right? So this is what Pluto wants to do. And that Juno retrograde reveals that those invisible commitments that you've made behind the scenes. And it could be tricky in the 12th house because it could be these deals that you made with yourself, having to do with um, any kind of self-sabotaging behavior, your willingness to put up with things like that. Um, all of these things, just like the kind of energy where it's like, oh, I feel like maybe I do deserve A, B, and C at the end of the day. It's like, okay, no. Pluto is not having that stuff, right? And for that reason, this could be just so profound for you because you often absorb so much more than people realize. First of all, like you essentially feel the atmosphere. You sense what other people need. I mean, just you and Cancer are very profound in this way, even more than Scorpio. Scorpio is very intuitive in other ways, and Cancer is even very intuitive in other ways. But when it comes to this is absolutely your jam, right? Sensing what other people need, intuiting what other people need. So what ends up happening with that, though, is you essentially end up carrying this emotional weight that was never even spoken aloud. Over time, it can become exhausting, where you're going to be realizing now where you've been carrying stuff that's not even your stuff, right? Now, this opposition may show where your daily responsibilities are connected to deeper unconscious patterns that you may have going on. So you can easily realize now that you are over fill in the blank. Maybe you're overworking, you're overgiving, or you're trying to be useful in some way, and you're realizing that all of those things, the overgiving, the overworking, the wanting to be overuseful, right? If that's even a thing, has become a way of avoiding your own pain. It's become this, it's like a coping mechanism. And so you might even see that your body has been speaking for the emotions that never had the space to be processed by, what does this look like? Lower back pain in your hips. That's where a lot of the past stuff hangs out. Um, a little like crinkety nonsense going on in the shoulders, right? Like around by like the labrum, tighter neck situation. That's really kind of where those land. It's like neck and not so much like into the traps, but like into like the skeletal, area of your shoulders and your neck, right? And then that lower back hip area, right? But the thing is, Jupiter in the sixth house of health wants improvement. Pluto in the 12th house wants release. So there's got to be some work that goes on in that space. So together they're asking you to stop treating your burnout as this like a scheduling problem when it's actually more of like a soul problem, right? Because you could say, well, I don't have time for that. Or I'm so busy, I have to do this. Or, this, I'm always going for this, and this. And making it seem like, oh, it's because you're always so busy because these things are expected of you because of your schedule. And maybe that's true, but you have to really look at the idea like perhaps I'm not only speaking to you, I'm speaking to me. Maybe we put ourselves in those situations as a way of avoiding something else that's maybe aching and needing to be looked at on a soul level. Now, Jupiter and Hygeia in Leo are also trining Neptune, your ruler, retrograde in Aries in your second house. So this can bring some healing around money, around value, self-worth, your relationship, which is the idea and the practice of receiving. And Neptune in the second can really blur financial clarity at times, but it can also spiritualize your values, which is quite nice. So it's asking you to stop measuring your own sense of self-worth through productivity, through your income, through how useful you are. And this could be a really tricky kind of energy because it can be very difficult to just like relax and just give yourself permission to do nothing, right? Could be difficult. Just be mindful of that. Now, at the same time, Pluto and Juno in Aquarius sextiling Neptune in Aries shows that there's some kind of unconscious healing that's connected, that's going on, that's connected to your sense of value. So there's this hidden fear that you have that may be tied to money. There could be this like thing that's always going on, sort of like low key, maybe not so low key, where you're always kind of worried about money. There could be this pattern of overgiving that's tied to self-worth that you're also at the same time trying to kind of work through. And this is need to rescue other people that could be tied to this belief that you have to be useful and of service in order to be loved, right? So we also have this basket configuration that's reminding you that healing isn't only about changing habits, right? It's about understanding the emotional and spiritual reasons that those habits and those things that you do formed in the first place. So it really is looking at the underpinning reasons behind motivation and why it is that you do what you do. That is in any way not exercising self-love and self-respect and self-care. Now, on July 23rd, we have Mercury is going direct in Cancer, and this is in your fifth house. While it's also conjuncting Kronos and also conjuncting Hades, and it's squaring Saturn and Aries in your second house. So for many of you, this is going to bring clarity around creativity, romance, children, self-expression, your joy, the desires of the heart, which is very fifth house, like just like being happy. What else is fifth house? Your creativity, entrepreneurial efforts. So Mercury going direct in that space can help you reconnect with something that not only makes you happy, but makes you feel more connected, if that makes sense, right? Especially with Mercury going direct, something that's been foggy or not very clear for the past few weeks, especially, starts to become more clear. Some sort of creative project starts to move forward. A conversation with a romantic partner, or maybe even one of your kids, especially your oldest child, can become much more clear, right? You can, maybe you're able to finally understand what your heart's been trying to say, but you haven't been able to quite figure it out or put your finger on it. Or maybe you're able to try to figure out whatever has been going on with one of your kids or that relationship situation or that thing going on within your business. But with Kronos involved, this is not a lighthearted energy only. Kronos adds maturity. Cronus is Saturn's dad, remember? So there's like maturity, responsibility, leadership. There's a lot of seriousness, right? Connected to this energy. And with Hades involved, something that's been like buried, like thrusted under the carpet, or that's just been neglected around the idea of something connected with your children, something connected with your joy and happiness, something connected to your business, or maybe even that relationship. This idea can come to the surface where there's this aha moment when Mercury goes retrograde. Now, for some of you, this can show where your happiness has been postponed for just too long. For others of you, it can bring a very serious conversation involving one of your children, or a romance, or maybe even the romance within a longer standing relationship, or some sort of creative dream, right? That maybe you've been working on, and maybe it's working out, or maybe it's not working out, but having that important conversation about that. Hades often shows us what's been pushed aside because life's become too heavy. And with this kind of energy, we're not able to keep doing that anymore. Like we have to look at the thing, whatever the thing is. It's going to be something different for all of us. Now, the square to Saturn in Aries in your second house adds pressure around money and self-worth and values and stability. So a creative desire might require some sort of financial realism, you know? There might need to be some financial realism about around a business, around a creative project, around your kids, around going on vacation, because fifth house is even just like going on vacation and having fun or taking some sort of chance. So this idea of financial realism hitting the scene is like, can I really do this? Now, for a lot of you, a romantic or maybe in a family situation brings up questions of value and security. So a dream or something that you really want to do may need structure before it can become real, right? So something needs to be thought through. Expenses need to be considered as an important part of that decision. Now, this transit reminds you, though, that joy can't survive indefinitely on imagination alone or on just thinking about it, right? It needs space to develop, it needs support, it needs permission to be an act to actually become a part of your life. Right? That thing that you want, it can't constantly stay between your ears and behind your eyes. It can't just be the thing that you talk about. It needs some real space to develop and permission, again, to become part of your life, which means actively showing up and doing, even if it's baby steps, working towards something. Now, on the 26th into the 27th, we have a lot going on that in that day, as we have Saturn going retrograde and we have the nodes shifting into Aquarius and Leo. But on the 26th, Saturn stations retrograde in Aries in your second house. So this is going to begin a review of money, income, possessions, all the second house things, your self-worth, your values, and just the foundations of your security. Now, Saturn retrograde here asks you to become more honest and mature about what actually supports you. So this can involve budgeting, income, pricing your work, right? If you're in a some kind of employment where you get like an hourly rate or wage, pricing your work. Establishing financial boundaries, even if it's a little difficult right now, learning to value your time more seriously. Psychologically, this is about worth. So that could be the only way it shows up for some of you. Maybe for others of you, money is not a thing. And it's just about psychologically, this is more about, your sense of self-worth and just the idea of worth and what holds worth to you and value in your life. Now, for a lot of you, this can sometimes this kind of transit can give endlessly because compassion comes naturally, right? Where you just want to give and give and give. But Saturn in the second is asking you to stop confusing generosity with self-neglect. Because your time has value, your energy has value, your gifts have value. The thing is, when we give and we give and we give, and people, and it's not their fault, because if they're used to us giving and then they just kind of expect it, perhaps we've trained them how to teach us to treat us, I mean, there is that, right? But just understanding your own value, especially at the end of this month, and not in a way where it's like, hey, I matter, like nothing obnoxious like that, but it's just simply acknowledging that, okay, you know what, look, I would really like to help this person. And I know I did promise and I still want to help, but maybe I can't help in the way or to the extent that I thought I was able to because of this, and this, right? And just being very honest with yourself about that. And then the node shift a few hours after Saturn goes retrograde. So the North Node moves into Aquarius in your 12th house, and the South Node moves into Leo in your 6th house. So this is starting a 1.5-year karmic cycle across your spiritual and your practical axis. So the South Node in Leo in your 6th house begins releasing these old ego patterns connected to work. We're all releasing ego patterns. It's just a matter of where this is hitting you. And for you, it's happening in that 6th house, the area of your work, the idea of usefulness and service and productivity and control and being recognized for what it is that you do, kind of releasing some sort of ego attached to that. Now, this doesn't mean that your work becomes unimportant or you stop caring about it. It's not about that, but it just means that you're no longer meant to define your worth by how much much you can produce, fix, manage, figure out, endure, and do all those things. Now, that North Node in Aquarius in your 12th house, which is your home, it's pulling you towards this spiritual liberation and this solitude and healing and surrender and just this more honest relationship with your own inner world. And I actually love this for you guys because over the next year and a half, growth comes through releasing unconscious patterns and just stepping back and just stepping back and just taking a beat when it comes to these unsustainable routines and just creating the space for yourself for spiritual renewal and just connecting again with that deeper part of yourself in a healthier way, and that the nodal shift is very deeply important for you guys because it's teaching you that rest isn't failure. It's part of the journey. It's part of the growth. You have to have stillness and rest in order to allow these downloads, right? We have to listen for God to give us these messages. Your soul just can't keep speaking if your life is too loud to hear it. It just doesn't work that way, right? We can't keep going and going and going. We have to take a minute and just rest, right? Otherwise, life is going to bring us that rest, and we don't want that, right? So, moving on to July 29th, full moon in Aquarius, Jupiter, Casimi, and Leo. Holy cow, what a cool way to end the month. It just is. I mean, full moons, what they do. They do what they do. They bring everything to a peak. But this moon is conjuncting Pluto and Juno, both still retrograde, in that 12th house, and it's opposing the sun as it does, but the sun is going to be conjuncting Jupiter and Hygeia in Leo in your 6th house. So very powerful private culmination for you. Something hidden may become really clear or suddenly very obvious to you. A pattern can reveal itself. This could be the kind of pattern where you're like, oh, wait. That's why I do A, B, and C. That's why that happened and then that happened and then that. These patterns that keep repeating in my life, right? And with so much grace, though, it's happening with grace. This is not the kind of revelation that's going to come with tears, screams, and thrashing on the floor. Like, how did I let that happen? No, it's just going to be like, oh, I needed to learn that thing, and that's why that happened, and that happened, and that. And then suddenly it's almost like a veil is going to feel lifted, even about things where you're going to be realizing maybe you were the problem. Some of the things maybe you were. A lot of the things maybe you weren't. But just looking at all of it with this kind of grace, right? So for some of you, it could be what's been considered in the past a fear or grief or emotional attachment or just unconsciously committing to something, that relationship that didn't work that you can't let go of, or that situation with the family situation, or the thing with the thing that you're involved in right now, whatever it is, right? It's rising into your space of awareness. And with Pluto involved, this can feel intense in the moment, but again, it's got grace. It's very liberating. Pluto brings what's been operating in the dark into light so that it can't be this creepy thing in the subconscious that scares you or that pushes you to make certain decisions or act in a certain way, or maybe even that works in a way that it keeps you small. And with Juno retrograde as well, and he's involved in this whole mix, you might even see this invisible agreement that you've been living by that you didn't even realize it. You know what I mean by these invisible deals that we make with other energies or with ourselves or with life ourselves, where it's like, well, no, I mean, I have to be responsible. I have to help this person in this way, that way. Why? It's just like the way it is. I have to do it. When it's like, oh man, maybe I don't have to do it in that way, right? With that promise to keep going no matter how tired you are, or the promise to be useful even when you're just shot. You're just so run down, or the promise to carry things quietly, right? You guys are so good at that, right? Or the promise to keep helping without asking for anything back. And these are these deals. You got to understand, we make these deals that we don't even realize we're making because we feel like it's the way that we need to be. And with the opposition to the sun and to Jupiter and Hygeia in that sixth house, it's going to be showing us that the body and routines and work and health are directly connected to all this stuff that's happening beneath the surface in the 12th house. So a health or a work issue may not be as random as it seems. It's likely revealing something that your spirit's been trying to tell you for a really long time. And this full moon is asking you to just stop abandoning your inner life in the name of being productive right now, Pisces, right? And that Jupiter reaching Cazimi in Leo, sitting right there next to the sun in your sixth house, is it's going to bring a beautiful moment of illumination around healing and work and health and service and your daily life. So after all the emotional and spiritual intensity of the 12th house full moon, the Jupiter Cazimi offers you a break and a breakthrough, right? Just in a very practical house. Sixth house is the most practical house. People say, oh, the sixth house is so boring. Like, give me boring any day of the week. It's just practical. It's your day-to-day life. It's important, right? So you can suddenly understand in a very real way, like real world way, what needs to change in your routine. Exercising, what are you eating? How are you working? What hours are you keeping? What boundaries are you exercising? And you could easily feel, because of this, a renewed motivation to care for your body differently. You might even receive clarity around something connected with a sixth house thing like work or health or some kind of daily structure that's going to actually support your well-being. But the deeper message is this, Pisces, that your daily life is sacred. We can't look at it anymore. It's like, okay, we wake up on Monday, we work Monday, and we go into Tuesday, we fall into Wednesday, we end up happening on to Thursday, and then suddenly it's Friday. And then Saturday and Sunday do their thing, and we're back into the same thing again. It's not about that, right? Where you recognize you wake up, you work, you eat, you rest, you serve, you move, you care for yourself. It's not, none of this separate from your spiritual path. None of this should be separate. None of this should be separate from your prayer, if you pray, from your meditation, if you meditate, whatever it is. By the end of the month, you're being asked to create a life that doesn't require you to disappear into service or exhaustion or emotional absorption, because you're learning that healing requires both surrender and structure. You have to have both. You have to have compassion. Yes, but you have to have boundaries at the same time. And that's so difficult, right? In that Pisces energy. You have to be spiritually open to things. You have to be. But you also have to exercise practical care, practical self-care. So it's great if you want to take a half an hour to meditate or pray or do whatever you want to do, but it's also really important that you're eating healthy and that you're moving your body. They're not uh, separated from each other. They're just not. So the second half of July is reminding you that you're here not only to help and fix and all of that, but you're here to live in a body and honor your limits and protect your peace and build routines that allow you the full and healthy life that you desire and that you deserve, really, more than anything, right? So that is what I have for you for the second half of July. I hope this was helpful in some way. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.